Okay, thanks. It's 7:02 PM. I'm calling the February 7th, 2023 Planning Board meeting to order. This meeting is being recorded both by audio and video. With that said, I will take roll calls, so when I call your name, would you please indicate that you're present? Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, present.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, present.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, present.
Beth Herr,
Beth Herr, present.
Rick Mitchell,
Here.
Richard Boroff,
Richard Boroff, present.
Pat Norton,
Present.
and Marnie Crouch, present. We have an interesting agenda tonight. It involves a more in-depth analysis of the Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary site. Emil Dahlquist has put together a slide presentation with showing various levels of development on the site. He's put an enormous amount of work into this, along with the assistance of Jonathan Poor. So I want to let Emil begin his presentation, and I would ask all members, if they have questions, to jot them down and then ask them at the conclusion of his presentation, because the town's legal consultant is here tonight as well to make a presentation to the board and also answer numerous questions that I had previously sent to him, and they are part of your package. But if it's our opportunity to really dig in and get some insight from him as to our process going forward. So, Emil, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marnie. Can I share the screen?
Should be able to. You tried?
Picture of boots on.
I know, I've been there.
Before we begin the presentation, can we talk about what are the goals? What are we trying to achieve tonight?
We're trying to achieve an analysis of what level of density can exist on the site. The consultants that the town employed at the January 26th presentation, I believe you were on vacation, did give some bare bones information about that. They did show an assisted living facility on the middle portion of the site, as well as some commercial or potential commercial use at the top of the site in the upper campus. But Emil has gone more in depth than that, and he can show us a low level of density in relation to a yield analysis, as well as a mid-level of density, as well as a high level of density showing an assisted living facility on the site as well. But it does provide much more in-depth information that was presented than was presented to the public on January 26th.
Okay, and then what do we, that's nice, we have a presentation, but what do we do with it?
Well, we do not know what the public will support on this site.
That's true.
And that is something that we eventually have to find out. So to educate the public as to what are the potentials on the site, it's only fair to give them an indication of what a low-level density concept plan looks like, a mid-level of density plan looks like, as well as a higher level of density plan looks like.
I get that. My
Well,
question.
maybe it'll,
At the
it might
end-
become clear.
No, this is a fair question.
once-
because
it
we
is
have-
fair, and I can answer
We
it.
have 6 weeks to get bylaw done, so this is not obstructive. I'm trying to understand the goals here.
Well,
So,
excuse
let
me, Rick.
let me
No, I'm
finish
going to
it. May I
interrupt.
finish asking the question? So how do we translate the, low, medium, and high density into a bylaw? Well, that's what I'm more
Well,
interested in.
John Whitten is going to answer those questions and similar questions after Emil's presentation.
So
But I've
that-
had communications with him.
So he knows what's going on.
Absolutely, he knows what's going
Well,
on.
Nobody on the board knows that, so,
That's why he's here tonight.
no, I understand that, but nobody on the board knows what the agenda is and what you have planned out, to how this is going to roll out to a bylaw.
Well, that
That's
is,
why I'm asking this question.
what rolls out to a bylaw is not an easy thing to do. Well,
I know
according to John Whidden, actually, that's not the hard part. The hard part is what you want to put in the bylaw. And obviously, the bylaw is inextricably tied to the development agreement. But Mr. Whidden will be here following Emil's presentation, and he can outline his thoughts on these matters.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay?
Good question.
This becomes a continuation, really, of the visioning workshop, where we sort of introduced some of the ideas and the principles and so forth. So this becomes a continuation of that dialogue, where we were able to put together a little bit more information to address the issues around intensity of development. Again, we're fortunate to have Mr. Whidden with us this evening, because he has been updated on what we've been doing with materials, so he and has responded accordingly. So this in large part is for his benefit, and also for the rest of the board to kind of see where things are going and whether or not this is something that would be of any interest to the planning board. So I'm going to be sharing this presentation with Jonathan Poor, who did a lot of the work on this. So between the two of us, we'll try to put this together. Just to reiterate here, we talked about the balance in planning the future. That's the economic opportunity, the environmental quality, and the social well-being. Those are the three components the town can manage in terms of preparing for the future, doing any kind of town-wide project. So with that in mind, this is sort of what we used as a guide going forward. And we talked about the principles last time. I won't go over them all, but it's about embracing the environment. These were introduced really at the visioning workshop that we had, and there seemed to be some unanimity in terms of what members felt would be sort of useful guiding principles. Retain historic resources, for example, buffering, positive net positive fiscal benefits to the town, and so forth. We also did a preference map that we wrote on the map that identified different features that were specific to this site that members felt might want to be encoded in some way in the bylaws as this gets developed. So this, again, these preferences were about maintaining what your values are, your core values, in how this site gets developed over time. And again, I'll go through this briefly. This is something that Mr. Whidden was asking for, preferences. Enhance the external buffers, preserve internal buffers, honor heritage landscapes, protect historic buildings, maintain scenic vistas, respect the trail and walk networks, avoid steep slopes, and preserve mature trees. These were some of the items that were identified at that visioning workshop. And with that in mind, both Jonathan and I kind of worked together on this project to go forward with some ideas about how to meet all of those. David Gamble had prepared this cluster plan, or this campus plan cluster map, which he again showed at the last community meeting. And he had it, the upper campus, the central campus, and a lower campus, A, B, and C. And we largely, in our analysis, would agree with that, but we would go maybe just a step further. And we further created a section of special district open space shaded in a light yellow right in the center of the drawing, and then a blue residential open space. Again, it's part of that heritage landscape. The idea being, if we could preserve that heritage landscape and develop the rest of the site, that would be a benefit to the overall site. We are showing some buffered areas where the site is sensitive to external and also internal buffers that separate the development at the bottom or in the central campus from the upper campus.
So, question.
Some tree
So
cover.
the yellow is the heritage site?
Correct,
Okay,
right.
thank
So
you.
we took that we took that section of the upper campus and designated it as an open space. It is a slope site, varies between 12 and 16% pitch on the hillside. So it's not amenable to large building construction, it's certainly not amenable to parking, but it is specific to the quality of the site in terms of the landscaping. And everything to the south of the retreat building, which is a red building right in the center, south of that is an open space residential, which becomes important as you're driving into the site to be able to see up and see that heritage building or the historic building there as you come in. So the idea being, when you're introduced to the site as you drive in off Essex Street, this would be a vista worth preserving. The other buildings that are shown in red there are the Pilgrim Hall at the bottom with a carriage or garage next to it. And then out on the right-hand side by Bridge Street is a Gateway House out there, which I think is a residence for visitors to the campus. We identified the trails. There's a spinal trail that goes up right through the center of the campus, goes right up through the open space.
Red dotted line?
The red dotted line, correct. And and then there are a couple of utility areas. I'll see if I can get this. Utility areas right down here on the lower part of that is where the existing wastewater treatment plant is. And thinking is, however much this site gets developed, it may have to expand, and one of the areas that might be over here where that could be expanded to if we need additional area there to take care of the utilities. One other possibility might be up here if there is development on the upper campus and they need a separate area again for wastewater treatment. This was a former, looks like, tennis court area, now it's being repurposed for some other use, storage area. That might be available because it would be essentially a grassed lawn when it's completed. So, it would not be, it would sort of blend in with the other open space around that, area.
Some questions?
Sure.
I just want to get a sense of proportion. The upper area shown in white, how many acres is that?
The upper campus?
Yeah, the area you've designated.
Yeah, David broke it down. I don't have that total area, but I do have another area that I want to show you further in.
Okay, so do you have any acreage for any of the yellow, blue? So we just know proportionally what's happening?
Well, I don't have that data right here, but, you can see as a percentage of the upper part, it might be, might be a 1/4%, something like that, 25% of that upper area. And down below would be a
And is there any way
similar
you
number.
can enlarge this on the screen? Because I'm trying to read what's on there, because we don't have this in our package. And I think it's great work, and I'm just trying to see better.
I don't think there is a means to enlarge this. I could get out of it and then,
Okay. Sorry.
if you really want me to do that,
Go ahead.
we'll do that. Well, I'd have to go into the record and then.
That's okay.
Yeah, okay.
Can you do it by removing the panel on the right-hand side and then
Yeah.
increasing the screen size?
No, the screen size is dictated by the top to bottom. Well, maybe that's a little better.
That is better.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Still better.
Much better.
Thank you, Patrick.
Oh, yes, much better.
What I did take the area of is that area between Kerr Hall on the top right and Pilgrim Hall on the bottom. Pilgrim Hall is down here. Kerr Hall is, or Pilgrim Hall is there, and Kerr Hall is up here at the top. So it's that area in between that's kind of a combination of the upper campus, which is this area, and then the lower or central campus, which is that area. It does not include the lower campus, which is the dormitories there. There's a dormitory down here on the end of Woodbury. And of
Amos,
course,
easy
pair of
question.
dormitories.
Please, what was the name of the hall?
Kerr Hall.
Kerr Hall.
AERR?
Yes,
Thank
on
you.
the top, yes. This was a yield analysis plan, just a way to look at that particular part of the property. That comes out to be 23.5 acres total. So if you deduct 10 to 15% for roads and so forth for inefficiencies, you come down to roughly 20 acres that would be developable. The underlying zone is 1 acre residential. So the allowable housing is 20 acres divided by 1 acre per house is 20 dwellings in there. The average house size might be 3,500 square feet these days. So the total build-out might be 70,000 square feet in residential construction in that particular area on the site. Now, that's just information that is kind of a basis foundation for going to the next level. This is the upper campus plan, which was developed. It's pretty much in concert with what David Gamble was looking at in terms of additions to Kerr Hall in the lower left, formulating an addition off, that there are a couple of kind of inefficient wings that come off the south side of Kerr Hall. So one thought was new construction actually could fill up that area there, and then you could put an addition there. And the assumption here is parking would be under the entire addition. It would be required to meet the parking count, given the existing floor area on the top, plus the new floor area divided by the parking requirements per square foot and so forth. The library, academic and chapel, David Gamble sort of came off this way and came over here, something like this. I just showed a little bit differently because one of the issues that we have is this dash line that you see right here is a 100-foot buffer off the property line, which is right here. And one of the thoughts was that should that building get relocated or torn down, or not relocated, but just torn down and rebuilt, that it would be good to have a more of a buffer protection there, because you can see the proximity to where the house is going to be built. The house on this particular lot on Bridge Street is going to be built up here somewhere. So it's going to be right next to the property line, essentially. And the same thing over here. So these houses, when they do get built, are going to be very close to the top of the hill here, which means they're going to be exposed to whatever's going on up here at the summit. And again, this is the area where there are 4 underground tanks, 1 tank there, and 1, 2, and 3 other tanks that are holding tanks for Hamilton's water. And the rest is surface parking.
That's existing.
Sorry?
Existing.
Yeah, those are existing lots. But again, there's going to have to be parking if anything is built up here below the building, which is obviously doable. At this point, I'd like to ask Jonathan to kind of take over. He's going to direct me to where he wants me to point with a pointer. And
Well, do you want to introduce what it is we did next, or shall I do that?
yeah, why don't you start on that?
Okay.
Before we get started,
Sure,
can we ask
yeah.
some questions? Because you just presented a lot of information. So I noticed lower campus, the existing housing is not discussed in this presentation. Can you give me a sense of what you're thinking?
It will be.
Well, we'll give you data on it, but we don't know how it's going to get repurposed. We anticipate they're going to stay. That's an assumption. That they probably will be designated as residential dwellings.
Okay.
They may be repurposed as maybe market rate housing. They might be apartments. We just don't know at this stage what that
So
is.
for the purposes of this discussion, you're really just talking about what's redevelopable.
Exactly, yeah. The top we see as developable in one sort of way. The lower campus, we're anticipating the buildings will stay. And if they don't, then we'll have to have some provision, I think, in the code for what will replace it. For example, the dormitories C and D right over here on this part, they're the smallest. They could possibly be replaced with a larger dwelling unit there, an apartment building. But we're anticipating really multifamily probably is going to be what happens there. Whether it's affordable, I don't know any of that yet.
Got it. All right, thank you.
Yep.
So what we did as a next step, after assuming that the dorms would stay, and if they did get taken down, that they'd be put back basically in the same footprint, is we didn't really deal with how to manipulate or to explore what would be done with that land under those dormitories, because we assumed the footprint would stay. So we focused instead on the areas that were left over after we accommodated the preferences that the planning board identified in the last workshop, which was edge buffers, internal buffers, heritage landscape, steep slopes, mature trees. We looked at, okay, what can we do with the remaining space if we put it through the lens of low density, medium density, high density, and we did an analysis. And so this is the first analysis of a low density proposal. And what we did is, in this one, actually tried to preserve some of the existing lawn and concentrated the buildings near Pilgrim Hall and near dorms E and F, so that maximum open space was preserved, but we still got the density. And this is an equivalent size to the boulders in terms of it's basically, you can take, I think it's the same number of dwelling units as the boulders in Wenham, and we basically just repurposed those sort of sample building sizes and integrated them into the site using the preferences that the board had identified. When you just took the boulders as a full footprint, a cluster, it was too big for any particular area on this site. So what we did is we essentially broke it into two main clusters, and we're able to get all of that square footage and all of those dwelling units into the space. And Emil, remind me, with our singles along the road, we didn't exceed the boulders that it's...
The boulders have a total of 24 units there. We're up to 26 total on the site,
So-
but 4 of those are single
Yeah,
houses.
so
on
it's
the road.
approximately the same,
Approximately
roughly
the
the
same
same.
Mhm.
And so that was just an exercise to see how something of that scale would sit on the site and follow the principles that the board identified as preferences. And in each of these schemes, we've tried to work around the idea that in the future, depending upon what happens on the top of the hill, the upper campus, or what happens in the future in terms of density, try to leave flexibility around expanding the septic system. So where I think it was identified that it's more valuable to develop more the interior of the lot than have heavier density toward the edges, I think an opportunity here that we explored is the septic system makes sense in its approximate location, but if it needs to be expanded, it may need more area. And where a septic is pretty much usable open space for the most part, it's lawn, we can shift a lot of the meadow or lawn area that we consume by the buildings into the septic area along the edge of the property. So it's sort of a shift of open space. And so what was interesting about this exercise is, I think, in some sense, we may have gotten about the same amount of usable open space as is there now, and yet it's still a pretty dense, a low density, but still with using cluster principles, we got again something the size of the boulders while preserving much of the campus characteristic of the site. And what we'll see is, a result of each of these exercises, a pattern started to emerge in terms of how the site might be organized and where the most developable areas might be in terms of density, and where the areas are that are most valuable in terms of keeping preserved for utilities, open space, and sort of meaningful connections. So do you want to go on to the next slide?
Yeah, these buildings
Anything I missed there?
Just
Emil?
the buildings in size are about 2.5 stories. Again, they're two dwelling units per building. and all of the garages are worked out, that the driveways are pretty nicely tucked in. We can go to the next slide, actually, and see more detail on that.
Yeah, so that shows you more the logic of how the units are laid out. They have shared driveways. If you drive right in and take a look at it, you can see that the boulders is set up so that there's a very meaningful and pleasant common space that the units surround, in a sense, like a green. And you don't have what some people term snout garages, where the garage is the most prominent element. The garages are tucked in, parking is tucked in, and it really combines a nice sense of density and open space as a model. So that's why we just borrowed it as an exercise. What if something like that occurred here?
Could I just make a comment, though?
Sure.
Even with this low density, there's no preclusion of development of Pilgrim Hall and the Retreat House.
Correct.
Yes.
Yep. And
Just
the
wanted to make
dorms,
that
Pilgrim
clear.
Hall, Retreat House, this is just in addition to the existing
Exactly.
buildings there.
I just wanted to make that clear. That
So
this-
that's.
And/or
so this
replacing
is
the
new
existing buildings.
Construction,
What's that?
Right.
new
Yeah.
construction.
New
New
construction,
construction.
yeah.
As opposed to reuse.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's what we're exploring the relationships between the existing structures, the existing open space, and the new buildings, trying to create meaningful connections between the two. Again, using the preferences of, when we finish this up, we'll look at some of the examples of the principles where we've preserved the board's preferences as patterns. But if we continue to the next slide, I just want to keep this moving. So then we tried medium density, and this is basically a variation on the plan that we had before you in the workshop. The board looked at in the workshop process. You've seen sort of this in basic principle. This is just developed a little further. And again, there's a cluster of buildings around Pilgrim Hall with a meaningful open space in front of Pilgrim Hall, but leaving plenty of breathing room around the retreat house. Again, the septic is allowed to expand and actually become contributing open space. In this scheme, the remainder of the existing lawn above the buildings along the main spine there would mostly be dedicated to parking. If behind the blue buildings.
Jonathan, excuse me?
Yes.
Where's the retreat house, please?
Right here.
Right there.
Okay.
And Pilgrim Hall is
The big one, the
Right there.
That's
H-shaped
Pilgrim.
building down below.
Yep. So the white area behind the blue buildings is shown as empty, but that would actually, in this scheme, in the medium density scheme, would be dedicated to parking. Now, we've laid out the parking but not drawn it. We're just, time limitations here required that we keep this sort of diagrammatic. But with the density that we've worked out here, there is adequate space for parking, but basically the remainder of the existing grass meadow becomes parking behind those buildings, and then we shift the meaningful open space over to the septic side, which is, in this case, hard to read here, but when we zoom in on it, it says open meadow and expanded septic. And so there's a cluster in the bowl of the hillside there, where what we've done is we've gathered the buildings around basically an open space or green, much like we did with the low density scheme, and that both of these clusters are basically set right in the bowl of the hill. Emil, if you can just sort of, I know we can't see the contours at this scale, but there's a bowl
Right here.
right up in there, and each of these clusters are sort of nestled into that bowl. To go further up the hill, it becomes embedded in a steeper slope, and it also crowds in on the internal buffer between the top of the hill and the lower part of the hill. So that made sense as a place to create density, but limit the edge of it. So that bowl of that hill creates sort of a natural edge, as does the expansion of the septic system and the open meadow that's near that. So with each of these schemes so far, there's basically density around Pilgrim Hall and density in that bowl, and then they're connected along the spine of the utility field or open meadow. And then in addition on this one, what we explored was around dormitories E and F, there's some developable area that hasn't really been discussed. The consultants have sort of circled dorm E and F and called that a zone, but there are some sort of leftover spaces that are, when we go to the next slide, we'll be able to see more clearly. Those are some level areas without getting into the external buffer. I guess it doesn't show in this in this slide, but there's developable area around dorms E and F that I think are suitable and actually create a little bit more of a neighborhood instead of the dorms being all by themselves over there. So in this scheme, I'm going to say that there's, in a sense, in the middle or lower campus here, I guess it's called the middle, we call it the middle campus, there are basically three neighborhoods. We'll call it the dormitory E and F neighborhood. Then there's sort of the center green spilling out under the meadow neighborhood, and we've shown this as potentially residential with an opportunity. If you were going to have some mixed use, this is an opportunity for where you could have it. If the board and the town decides they don't want it, that can all be residential. But we have identified this as potentially an area where there could be mixed use. And then as we get over toward Pilgrim Hall, there's a third neighborhood clustered around Pilgrim Hall, again around meaningful open space that has quite a bit of density. All the parking is set up behind the buildings, tucked in, screened from the entry sequence, screened from the retreat house, screened from all the roads. And then there's pedestrian passage through all of that with minimal crossing of vehicle lanes. So again, this isn't meant as a specific design or set of buildings. It's really a set of relationships trying to capitalize on the available developable space and organizing it around existing structures and existing utilities. So you want to go into the details on this? So there's just a little bit of a detail around Pilgrim Hall, showing how the parking can be tucked behind the buildings. There's an additional road that runs down the middle of that space so that there's a little bit more freedom of vehicle movement without a lot of congestion. And those are shown as 2,000 square foot footprints, which could be 1.5 stories high or 2 stories high. They could be one unit, one larger unit or 2 units each.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the right-hand side, we have the medium density neighborhood around the central green, spilling out into the open meadow, which again is the expanded septic. Those could be all residential, a little bit larger scale, again, or some combination of residential and mixed use, again, up for discussion. So you want to go to the, and we'll talk about, Emil's created a chart that shows the square footages and basically number of dwelling units for each of these schemes, so you can compare and contrast from the original yield analysis that he did for the as-of-right development. Okay, so now we're in the high-density analysis, and with this, what we did is, to create the highest density, we went ahead and experimented with an assisted living, independent living, assisted living memory care model. So here it's labeled congregate housing. And what we used as a model was the residence at River Bend, which is roughly an 80-bed unit. And we took that square footage and that configuration and just sort of reconfigured it so it sat better in the landscape. Again, we're in the bowl of the hillside here. And what was interesting, with just a couple of readjustments of the shape of the building, we got, again, a meaningful courtyard space that can communicate with the open meadow. And then with one of those congregate housing, if it includes memory care, one of the issues with memory care is you need useful outdoor space for the memory care patients, and it needs to be a bit contained for their safety. And what's really I think pretty convenient about the topography here is on the uphill side, if you came out at the second level, you could have a somewhat contained terrace that could be contained on one side by the building and on another side by a little bit of retaining. So it works with the topography and creates basically a natural contained terrace for memory care patients without fencing them in. So it uses the topography to the advantage of what a program would be for that type of building. Then again, on the public side of the building, we did put the parking on the public side, but then screened it. And again, open space spills out into the meadow and the expanded septic system. Then some units linking over to a clustered neighborhood by Pilgrim Hall of each one slightly different character. Now, what's interesting here is in our high, medium, and low density, you can kind of treat this as a menu of ideas that you can mix and match. So you could take one of the other Pilgrim Hall neighborhoods and combine it with this, with the congregate housing. So there, to some extent, some of these things can be mixed and matched as a menu, which creates more flexibility in terms of initially deciding what we want to code or what we want to adopt. And you could even, if you were willing to put the work in, you could create more flexible codes and have the option of sort of ratcheting up or ratcheting back, depending upon what buyer came through. But that's what our discussion needs to be about tonight. So I don't want to get too far into that right now.
So just a quick question on between the medium and high density midsection. I'll start with the medium density, and you've got the 8.4 and 8.4 units. And I know you said you didn't have time to do parking, but I assume it would be out in front of those buildings. Which, are you talking about the Pilgrim Hall or the?
Medium density.
Medium density, if you go back to medium density, I'll try and point it out to you.
Parking would be behind the blue buildings in the white area.
Yeah.
Yep.
In that area.
In that area, and then also you can see actually a beginnings of a curb cut. Emil can't zoom in, but
Right here.
no, yeah, there, and then go further to the right. You can see two curb cuts opposing each other. Keep going right behind each of those buildings is a curb cut going behind those buildings. That's the pedestrian walk. So if you go one more to the right, come down, Emil. Sorry. Come right down behind the two.
This one.
No, the two blue buildings right behind the green. You'll see it's very faint, but that's the pedestrian walk behind each of those.
Yeah,
Right there,
there's-
yes. There's two curb cuts.
Yeah, there should be a parking.
There's parking there and
parking
parking.
for that
So you can see
fourth
where the
person.
curb cuts would be, but the
Right.
parking isn't drawn in.
Right.
It's actually roughed in a different part of the packet. There just wasn't time to draw all this stuff. This is a lot of work. But the parking works for this. We worked out the density and the parking, and there's enough space here to do it. So this isn't a guess. This is analyzed.
So it's feasible.
It's feasible. It's absolutely feasible. So
There's the curb cut here, and there'd be a parking.
there you
lot
go. There you go.
Right there.
Yep.
And that's
So-
the curb cut. There'd be parking back here.
And then it's another curve.
So again, and what's interesting with the topography, I was going to try to do a section tonight, but I just ran out of time. I have to run a business, unfortunately, as well as serve on the planning board. So, but what's interesting is because you have a slope behind those buildings, there's a way to cut in the parking a little bit into the hillside so that you have a little bit of retaining and then landscape above the retaining. And if you do it in a terrace type fashion, you've got the beginnings of a stormwater management strategy with a concealment of the parking from all sides of the property. So you can marry stormwater management, landscaping, and parking into the scheme. And again, we're looking at those things, we're analyzing those things, but there's just not enough time to draw every one of these little details. So, so this is just a zoom in of those two explorations. So again, on the left, you could substitute the medium density scheme next to Pilgrim Hall. There's just little variations on kind of clustering around Pilgrim Hall and making common open space oriented toward that, and at the same time preserving the pedestrian corridor that runs, the spine that runs from the bottom of the site to the top of the site, which we'll look again at when we get out to the larger scale.
These, just if I can interrupt here, there's going to be a 12-foot wide alley that connects these two roads. There's going to be parking off that for these units. The front of the buildings actually are over here on the Greenway side, and there'd be parking in the back, and they might be freestanding parking garages on the other side of the parking area, which would be screened by these buildings and landscaping here in the corner. This would have to slide over a bit, but we can do it in both areas. There's a curb cut right there, and this is a curb cut here that would connect right through, or it could just be coming in the back and not have any there in the front.
And then there's a curb cut across the street from that that serves the buildings across the street.
So again, parking is feasible to meet the density
Yes.
of
Yeah.
that site?
Yes, with some shuffling. You know, this is a diagram,
No,
but
no, I
And these would be townhouses, actually. They would be 2-story, 2.5 stories, very tightly arrayed in this manner. So it would be a different type of housing unit that would be kind of unique in a lot of ways. And again, everything kind of keys off Pilgrim Hall in terms of its orientation and symmetry.
So then over to the right, again, there's just a little detail of the congregate housing, and again, on the upper portion, the yellow glow of the outdoor space, that would be your memory care up above. That'd be your memory care outdoor space, and then your more general population for the congregate housing open space, which then can link to the larger green, which is basically also the septic system. In each of these cases, there's an additional road that I haven't talked about. When we zoom out to the larger views, that one of the common themes in all of these is trying to spread the traffic around a little bit, not have it concentrated on the 2 or 3 access points onto the site. So if we look at this here, what's been shown as a diagram is where the Woodbury Street has a little bit of a straighter shot and a longer sight line to create an additional access point, and it's specifically between abutters, so that it's not aiming at a building, it's between abutters. And it's actually got a little bit of a bend and landscaping so that it would be baffled, so you wouldn't necessarily be able to look right in. So it would baffle lighting, would baffle activity, baffle noise. And then, again, the first thing that you experience is the open meadow, which is, again, the expansion of the septic system. And in each case, that entry point has basically a landing point of like a green. So in each of the schemes, there's some meaningful place to land as you come in. So maybe what we could do, just talk briefly about some of the pedestrian spines that are common to each of these units, to each of these analyses. So in the low, medium, and high density development analysis, we preserved in each case the bottom to top pedestrian spine, which goes from dormitories C and D all the way up to the very top of the hill and the high point. So almost just tracing that, loops around. You could either go through or loop around, and then lands at the high point as a destination. So you've got top to bottom pedestrian connection. Then in each of these, as you come in the entrance, the Billy Graham Way entrance off of Essex Street, there's no pedestrian walkway there. Would need to add one. There's an existing one from the pond up to the intersection. And then what we've done is, in each case, we've connected that pedestrian walk to the main spine and tried to do it with minimal crossing of traffic in each of these schemes. We've also shown wherever we have a busy four-way intersection, we've tried to use traffic calming measures, whether it be a rotary or a larger loop, which is in the high-density No, I guess the medium density scheme has the larger loop around the central green there. So that's, again, a traffic calming strategy. So it's not a rotary as so much as a loop, and eliminates the long straight along the septic area. Currently at the Gordon Conwell, it's interesting that along that straight right now they have a lot of speed bumps, and I'm not sure how effective they are, but anytime you have a long straight section like that, cars tend to build up speed. And so what the attempt has been here is to break that up a little bit and make sure we've thought about safety and traffic calming. So then there's other miscellaneous pedestrian connections. Any of those thin green lines are pedestrian connections, and you'll see them looping around the site and connecting key points of the site in each of the schemes. And those are negotiable in terms of how they're executed. But we've thought through trying to maximize pedestrian connections, minimize crossing of pedestrians and traffic, and link them to the meaningful open spaces. So what's interesting with each of these schemes, without it being intended, what ends up happening is there's kind of a common thread with them in terms of not only preserving what the preferences of the board were in terms of the campus qualities and site qualities of the space, but in each one of these, there's a kind of a general theme where there's a crescent of open space that links from the sort of entrance or gateway of Pilgrim Hall around through the open meadow of the septic, and then finishes with a central green, which is at the head of the traditional curb cut and car entry.
Jonathan?
Yes.
Excuse me. What are there's, like right above the the name Woodbury, there's like a green line with red dots in it. What is that?
Oh, that's an existing trail system. So what we did is there are existing trails and pedestrian walks on the site, and they're indicated as basically a red and green dashed line. And you'll
Okay.
see them all through the site, and you can see them in your packet here. Anything with a red and green dash is an existing pedestrian route, and we've attempted to
There.
link all of those.
Thank you.
So while these plans look very, very specific and we talked a lot about specific details, these are not meant to be architectural plans. They're not meant to be prescriptive at this point. They're really just explorations of what if you took the preferences that the planning board expressed about preserving the campus qualities of the site, and what if you applied a low, a medium, and a high density exercise to this, and we tried to use known quantities, like you can go visit residents at Riverbend, feel its scale. You can go visit the boulders, feel its scale. And then Emil, again, has done the yield analysis of the by right, so you can use all of these as a reference point to the by right yield analysis of
Can
the
you
23
give
acres.
a quick reference to how big are the relationship to Riverbend? The reason I'm asking is my wife is there, so I see it regularly.
Yeah, this is a different shape, but it's basically the exact program at Residents of Riverbend.
Say that again, please?
It's the exact same program size amenity as Residents of Riverbend. Again, not to say that we're proposing that, but it's a useful metric that folks can go be familiar
So
with.
where does that correspond to? Which buildings here?
This one
Right here.
That,
This one right there? Okay, thank you.
It's 25,000 square foot footprint, and it's on 2 levels, so you're up around 50,000 square feet. There is actually part lower level there in the memory care but this is a 50,000 square foot 2-story building.
Do you want to go to the?
yeah, so now what I'd like to do is turn it back to Emil, and unless there's any questions about the maps, we can always come back around to them.
Yeah.
I'd like Emil to present his comparison chart.
I don't know if you want to touch on this one, Jonathan, but this is just a comparison of the 3 together. As you were saying, it could be a mix and match.
Right.
The buildings they're shown as blocks here, but they're actually different sizes, square footages, and even heights. But
No, it's actually.
But you can see the commonality of this. Look at the yellow crescent, basically, from Pilgrim Hall down through the septic and back up to a green. It's common in each scheme, and that was not intended. It's just how the land sort of suggests the way how this thing might be developed. And again, trying to capitalize on what, you think of a septic system as a constraint. It doesn't need to be a constraint. It can be an opportunity. And the buffers don't need to be constraints. They can be opportunities. So really, I'm so I don't want to get to the punchline before Emil presents his chart. So why don't you
Oh,
present the
come on,
chart?
you can give it up.
What's that?
Okay, here's a chart. This is a summary of really the central campus on the top. In the middle, it's the lower campus residential development, and the bottom is the upper campus development summary. So starting on the top, on the left-hand column there, you see the three options: low, medium, and high intensity. And then we try to break down what the buildings are. There are, for example, 15 buildings. There are 26 total dwelling units in those buildings, no mixed use. There are 4 one-story, one dwelling unit per 2,000 square feet. There are 1.5 stories. Again, the footprint is roughly, these are about 2,600 feet, so it might be 900 and 700 on the upper level bedrooms. Again, that's the model of the boulders. 2-story, one dwelling unit per 2,000 square foot per floor, 0, 0, 0, all the way across. The total is 65,000 plus, which is very close to the that yield analysis plan of 70,000. I mean, these numbers are rounded off, so it's roughly equivalent to what the yield analysis plan is, but this is done in a clustered, compact way, allowing that open space to remain existing and to be of value to the site.
Both marketing value and
Yeah.
neighborhood value.
Mhm. On the medium level, there are 17 buildings, 56 total dwelling units there. Here we introduced mixed use, and the mixed use would be residential on the upper level, possibly like a live-work or workplace on the main level. It could be small retail, it could be a restaurant, it could be something in that order, but very small retail, or not. Again, the idea with mixed use is that as the market changes, so could the use of the space. So these are slightly larger buildings. They're more in the 4,000 square foot as opposed to 2,000, but nothing is of a scale that would be completely out of the realm in terms of what you would anticipate for a small neighborhood center like this.
Oh, but as you said, there's flexibility, so you could not have mixed use and
Yes,
just
correct.
have residential.
Yeah, right. So one level, in all the mixed-use buildings, that whole ground level could be residential, which would add to the total dwelling units here.
Or some common space or,
Yeah.
gym or for residents or
Right.
whatever.
Right. So here the breakdown is 4 single-story, one dwelling unit per. Part of the reason to do these single-story is to get a different scale in there, some variety. So it's not a cookie cutter. They're all the same size, marching down the road. So we wanted to vary that. And actually, if you look at some of the layouts, we introduced some of these buildings, even near the apartment buildings, the dormitories, just again as a scale, to kind of mitigate the scale of those large buildings a little bit as
And
you
to
approach them.
incorporate the dormitories into the neighborhoods rather than having them be in isolation.
Trying to integrate the dormitories into the neighborhood, correct. There are no 1.5 stories, but there are 18 2-story, one dwelling unit per 2,000 square feet per floor, 18 of those. The total is 144,000 square feet gross square footage in the medium range, using these numbers. On the high density or high intensity, 14 buildings, including the institutional occupancy. The total of dwelling units are 52. Mixed use, there's one which could be like a community hall. It's a building opposite the Pilgrim Hall, opposite that greenway going up there. It could be a community center. It could be it could be a restaurant with a lawn for eating out and so forth. So there's a possible one mixed unit there. Also, the understanding is that Pilgrim Hall is it could be residential on the upper levels, and it could be really kind of a neat building. It could be used in many ways for mixed use on the lower level. for any number of things, daycare center, any one of those things. So there's a lot of potential there, and the same actually with the retreat building. So there's one mixed use, that building is at 6,000 square feet actually there. So, and again, in the high, there's one story, one dwelling unit per 2,000 square feet. So there always a small number of these small one-story cottage-type buildings. And then there are 32 two-story, one dwelling unit per 2,000 square foot per floor. So it'd be two per building there, and so forth, going down. And then we added 2 levels of 25,000 square feet each to the assisted living building, 50,000. So when you add up all these areas, plus the 50,000, you're at the 160,000 square foot range. So again, this is sort of the baseline as of right level, going up to 160. Now, the lower campus residential are the dormitories, A and B, C and D, E and F, all existing. And I took these numbers from David Gamble's existing report, his square footages. And that totals 194,000 total square feet in total, 209 individual units. Now, they may be combined to be larger, more market rate. I don't know how that's all going to get configured once it goes through renovation, but elevator connect the floors on 2 adjacent buildings in each of the 3 cases. And then finally, the upper campus, it's common to all of the schemes, Kerr Hall, the chapel, library, academic center. Again, the asterisk is that these are David Gamble's numbers, and I mean, we concur that this is a very reasonable thing to do or consider. So he was up around total 232,000 gross square feet. So that's kind of our breakdown at this stage to, again, the idea is kind of grapple with intensity on this. What are the variables? What's at play here? And what is it that the town, the decision makers want to use as their guideline to come up with a choice, if that's what it is. And again, this is all intended to kind of eventually service the code, which Mr. Whitten is going to be working on, and all its complexity. And so it becomes kind of useful information in that it has been tested, it has been verified that it's workable. We have a good handle on that, and we could actually extract now some occupancy numbers, which might be the next step. So, for example, we can get the employees at Riverbend, roughly. The upper campus, we could get, we know the occupancy as business. There's a couple of hundred square feet per occupant. So you could run through the math, you can get what the rating of each one of those buildings is for occupancy. And with residential, you could assume 3-4 people per residence, possibly 2, 3, 4. So you could take an average there. So we could come up with numbers actually for the population on the site as well, which might be another step if that becomes important to be a determinant in which choice to make. So that's pretty much the breakdown.
So I just, a couple little tidbits. For stormwater management, there are places to put in a retention pond without taking buildings down. We haven't indicated that, but there are places to do it without compromising the logic that we've shown. We've talked about parking. You know, parking is a gating issue at the top of the hill. It's less of a gating issue at the bottom of the hill. The septic is not a gating issue. There's places to expand it. We've shown that we can achieve a good amount of density and still have good buffer principles. What I think is more illuminating in this exercise is not so much that there are constraints within the lot or property that limit density. I think the next step is you have to look outside of the property, and you have to look at the road systems, and you have to look at the traffic safety and pedestrian safety and whatnot. And the question then is, the impact of the abutters and just general safety. Without a traffic study and without something specific to put into this as a traffic study, that is a fairly big variable and question here. So I think for me, the aha moment was the puzzle to solve is less inside the property. You can achieve quite a bit. You can achieve quality of space, you can achieve density. There's a lot of variety to choose from in terms of flexibility and, in uses and programming, depending upon what the desire is by the board or the town and the college. But we quickly need to narrow this down so that we can then figure out what the larger impact is outside of the lot.
Well, the other consideration that needs to be developed, this is an excellent exercise, and obviously you guys put a lot of work into it, so it certainly advances the discussion. The other element, though, is what's the economic value of each of these exercises? Because without that, people can't make really a intelligent decision. I mean, it's great, good for discussion, certainly internally and showing the public, but just doing that without the economics isn't fair to anybody, because we'll be making a decision sort of without sufficient information to say, okay, well, if we go with this scenario, it yields X to the seminary and X to the town. So you're right, we gotta do traffic and septic and lighting and noise and all those things that go with that. But we also need to have the economic impacts here to really judge.
Absolutely, but we're trying to build the tools so that can be the next step.
Well, I don't think that you can separate the two, just as you can't separate traffic from these.
To start somewhere. Agreed, and we need to start somewhere with some specificity.
Yeah.
Let me follow up on Rick's question, economics. So the existing apartments in the middle campus are probably worth $250,000 apiece.
Lower campus.
Lower, well, yeah, I guess lower, okay, lower, the newer apartments in the lower campus.
Well, could you refer to them as dormitories if you're talking about the dormitories?
The newer dormitories in the lower campus.
So that's E and F.
They have about 1,000 square feet. I see no potential of turning those into anything besides apartments, because they don't have parking. They have just public parking. Senior housing would want private parking. So they're pretty much there. They can be refreshed and sold off as a 100-apartment unit development. And they're pretty much stuck in what they are. And they're actually worth quite a lot. Collectively, they're worth $20 or $30 million, which is a sizable amount to the seminary. So you kind of have to start with that. Now, the plans that we've seen this evening for new buildings nearby, sort of, streaming from those, all are 2,000 to 2,500 square feet per unit. Those are not apartments. You can't market apartments that size. Those are retirement, small townhouse, seniors. They're going to have, 2,500 square feet, 3 bedrooms. Some might even have 4. And so there's a big issue for the town, whether those are senior units. They're quite similar in size to some of the senior units going on, which means they would net the town quite a lot of money. They net the town $30 million of tax base and have very little service load because it would be seniors. But if you don't design them to begin with as seniors, you could have, families in there. You could redesign them as apartments. I'm just not sure that the economics for the town work with these units if they're not senior housing. I mean, that's, I think.
Or some form of private housing.
What?
Some form of private housing, as opposed to a commercial rental property.
Yes, they cannot be apartments at that size and price point. They would be owner-occupied units of some form.
They're actually bigger
Private
than a
housing.
lot of houses around.
Well, they.
That's, you can buy a lot of houses in town for less than that. These,
Yeah.
they would have to cost 800,000 to $1 million
Yeah.
at that size, okay?
They're big houses, they're big property,
They're big units.
residences.
And so, I mean, I think we ought to try and, so here's another question. If you design those new houses as senior houses, you have to ask the question, is that what seniors want? Do they want to be next to an apartment building? They want to be across the street from a very large communal service septic system? Do they, it doesn't fit with some of the other senior housing projects in which seniors are returning to the countryside. And not necessarily, I think we need to settle on what the use is going to be before we get into the physical layout. Okay?
Well, I think that's where we're going.
Well, we're doing the physical layout first of all,
Well,
and then letting the use kind of fill in. And I would sort of like to see us say, here are the consequences for the town, for the seminary, of, different kinds of uses, occupancy and so on. And then I'm perfectly believe that we'll be able to design around them, given what's been done. But I would really like to see that question tackled first before we get into the details of designing them.
Well, I think and this is why I asked the question at the beginning, is where we're going with this. I think the next step, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is to frame potential uses. I don't know if we're going to do it upper, mid, and lower campus. And then how do we capture those or encompass those uses within a bylaw so that it would allow the freedom for an alternate design that could be more or less units, or but say you can have, I'll take the central campus here because that's where it's gotten the most attention, is you can have townhouses, you can have single condominium type houses like at Canterbrook. You can have units that have two, they're attached. I guess that's townhousing. You can have different residential uses within that zone so that we're not designing that right now. We're just saying within the particular zone, upper campus, we're thinking commercial. And this is a question I think we've got to get into. Well, what happens if that commercial just doesn't happen? Or can that bylaw that we're dealing with also allow, if they get scraped clean, can senior housing go up there? Or some other commercial, take the Riverbend and put that up there? That's what I think that's where we're trying to go, is how to capture the uses either within the zone or within each zone or within the entirety of the campus.
I think that's what John Witten requested of us in the last hearing, is list those uses and then also along with them rate how easy or difficult would you like that application to be
Yes,
when
I
we put
think
in front of the board.
I think
Like,
that's where we're going.
it was, should the requirements to,
Yes.
is it by right requirement or do you have to
Yes.
jump through hoops with a special permit?
Yes,
For each of those different kind of potential uses, which is good to have the visuals, but I think ultimately we need to get to that point where we describe them and then rate them as far as the
right.
difficulty to
I
obtain
think
the
right. I think we
approval.
need to do that first before
Or-
we get into the weeds. So, is that where you think John Witten is coming in?
Well, I think John Witten is here, and unless board members don't have any questions, I would ask Mr. Witten if he had any questions, and to what extent do these intensity of development models or conceptual plans add to the discussion? Because obviously the work that Jonathan and Emil did really focused on residential development. Although there was the option for mixed use, it wasn't, as Jonathan said, prescribed by any means, and so there very well could be apartment buildings instead of mixed use. So it's clearly a residential focus with the opportunity for some type of small retail, and of course, in Pilgrim Hall and the Retreat House, there is that option for commercial development. And I agree with you, at the top of the hill, there has to be the option for residential development as well, because, again, we don't know what the future holds. I think that, with respect to uses, that only takes you so far, because we're pretty much agreed it's a residential use of one form or another. And I have to emphasize that whatever happens on this site, it can't just be piling buildings onto it and expecting that to yield any kind of economic benefit, because what will make the site attractive is also what will make the site valuable. And so you can argue that maybe someone in senior who is in 55-plus housing might not want to be near apartment buildings. Nevertheless, if it's well-designed and well-landscaped, it's going to be more appealing than if there's just, if the site were to be overbuilt, at which point it would probably, the capacity would be exceeded, and it would no longer be an appealing place to be. I mean, one of the things that we have to consider is to entice developers to go there, and then individuals to live there. And so without some kind of overall idea or vision of what that looks like, just trying to delineate a variety of uses can only take you so far. So long story short, I think we have to focus on both things. I think it's relatively easy to determine what uses should be prescribed. And I think in the memo that I sent to you, I listed them. And probably we could vote to recommend that under no circumstances should there be industrial development on the site, and some of the other.
So you started out by asking John Whitten if he had
Yes.
a question.
I know,
then
and I gave a
launched into-
speech instead.
So do we have a question for John
No,
Whitten?
we do, and I kind of said that because in my email exchanges with Mr. Whitten, he did indicate that he needed a lot of information from us before he would
Let's
start
go.
writing. So, Mr. Whitten, if you're here, you
I'll
can
get rid of that.
make all the board members happy. They won't have to listen to me anymore. They'll listen to you instead.
There he
So,
is.
thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, members of the board. So that was an excellent presentation, and I really appreciate the time and effort that went into it. It's very helpful for me. So let me say, if I could, Madam Chair, 5 things that I think we need to address collectively, some of which has already been talked about, and then I'm happy to respond to the questions that the board has posed to me, and or kind of answer it more through conversation. I think the first thing that I'd recommend strongly, especially after listening to tonight's presentation, is what I've labeled in other jurisdictions a concept plan. So we take the 3 campuses, upper, middle, and lower, just to use those phrases liberally, and the bylaw that we're talking about, the overlay district that we're talking about, would require a linkage to a concept plan, which would identify, generally speaking, the location of the proposed uses that we just heard about. Pre-existing structures, new development, use of internal road systems, parking, and so on. So some detail, but not granular. It's a concept plan. Town meeting votes on the concept plan. Town meeting can continually vote on amendments to the concept plan. The developer of one portion of the concept plan might be a totally different entity than the developer of the upper portion of the concept plan. And there may be ongoing revisions to the concept plan. The reason for the concept plan, though, is to integrate all of what we just heard from Jonathan and Emil relative to here's how the site looks, should be integrated together in terms of trail networks and buffers and so on. It's not granular, but it's a concept. The town meeting approves it, and then the planning board, as the special permit granting authority or uses by right through the building department, those new structures, those new uses must conform generally with the concept plan. And that provides that continuity. So the first thing is the concept plan. The second thing is what the board's talking about and the chair has provided in terms of a memo, uses by right, uses by special permit. That's very straightforward. Then I think, and we touched on it tonight, there needs to be maximum, my opinion, and others may disagree. I think you always need a maximum square footage and you always need maximum density of dwelling units. In some situations, you can leave it up to the market, but in a suburban town such as Hamilton, where there's constraints in terms of both abutting properties and carrying capacity, I think you do want to articulate a maximum, no more than dwelling units, no more than special permits. There could be a way of relaxing that, so the ceiling could be lifted pursuant to a special permit. So I've seen that, and that's something for the planning board to consider, and I could draft that as an option for the board to respond to. The third thing is really a subset of the fourth thing is the subset of what we just talked about, and that is dimensional characteristics. So whether it's setbacks or height, kind of standard garden variety dimensional requirements, that's pretty straightforward to plug in. And then lastly is really an intriguing opportunity for the board to work with the seminary. And that is there are so many pre-existing non-conforming structures on the site. What will happen to them with the new bylaw? Town meeting's adoption of the bylaw will automatically render, based on the conversation we're having, a lot of those structures pre-existing non-conforming. That might be helpful, but it also might be a detriment to the future vision that the board has for the site. So one thing for the board to consider, it's down the road a bit, is whether the adoption of the bylaw could create conformity for those non-conforming structures. In other words, the legislative body, town meeting, could grant conformity to something that would otherwise be non-conforming. So 48 Section 6 does not require the non-conformity to last ad infinitum. So it's a small piece, but an important piece where we have so many pre-existing structures. Relative to the dormitories on the lower campus, maybe by creating conformity, it will help the developability of those structures, not require them to be torn down, and so on. So that's just something for the board to consider. So I would recommend to the board, you're far along. This conversation tonight has advanced what I think the board wants to see on the site. But I think the missing piece, and one that ties everything together, would be that concept plan. It could be the vision that was just presented. It could be a mix and match, a little bit of what David Gamble had presented. But the developer of the site for now is the seminary, and they need approval to move forward. And one way to get that approval is through this notion of concept plan, and then it's tethered to the bylaw that we're talking about. And then, Madam Chair, if I could just go on one moment longer, because it's responsive to some of the questions that you posed to me. And that is the role of the development agreement. So I'm saying what the board already knows, but for the benefit of the public and others who haven't dealt with development agreements, a development agreement is nothing more than a contract. It's an agreement between the seminary and the town of Hamilton to do or not do the following things. There are some things that belong in zoning, and there are some things that belong in a development agreement. Where that line is always a little bit fuzzy, but I can say, for example, the zoning bylaw cannot specifically require the set aside of open space, that is the trail network. The bylaw cannot specifically require a lot of the preservation of the lower campus in terms of the wetland buffer. So there are some things that we can't articulate in zoning, either because it's too cumbersome or because we don't have the authority under 40A. And then there are some things in the development agreement contractually that the landowner can give up. Contractually, the landowner can give up a conservation restriction, can give up a ceiling on density, can give up set aside of certain buffers and so on. So where that line is, you kind of know it when you see it, but I see these two documents going hand in hand. They are timing wise pretty much hand in hand. But of course, I would never recommend to the town of Hamilton, to the select board, to execute a development agreement until we have some certainty that town meeting will approve the bylaw, and we don't until the bylaw has been passed. So the development agreement does not get executed typically until after the zoning has been confirmed. And the reason for that, in part, is because you don't ever want an allegation that the zoning at town meeting was influenced contractually. And that's the attack of contract zoning. And we need to do everything we can to stay away from that, and we can. Zoning's going to stand on its own. The development agreement is going to stand on its own. One is not beholden to the other. And then my last comment is the zoning bylaw, in my opinion, should reference the requirement for a development agreement. Because then if the seminary sells to 4 different parties, that development agreement you negotiate with the seminary will hold. It's going to run with the land. But you may want to fine tune it with the subsequent 4, 3 other parties that take over after the seminary. So let me stop there, Madam Chair. I do not have any specific questions for the presenters other than just complimenting them on their work, and it's very helpful to me. I think what I saw tonight is the concept plan. Whether the board agrees with the delineation of low, medium, and high, or a combination of the 3, that's the board's prerogative, but that's the concept plan. And that's what we asked town meeting to approve together with the zoning bylaw change, the overlay.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Whitten. So the one thing that we don't have here that would really assist the planning board is a sense of where the town stands on this. I know the abutters have expressed some concern, but I have not seen any report of what their particular statements were. We have not seen a report from the first workshop that the consultants conducted to get a sense of what some of the participants may have stated with respect to their preferences for the site. In our visioning workshop that we did on January 10th, we did identify various areas that we thought should be preserved. And so I guess my first question to you, which is in addition to all the other numerous ones I drafted and probably caused you to turn a little grayer, is can the development agreement provide for conservation restrictions, the preservation of the historic buildings, and I'll add a footnote to that, the trail network and some of the open space through construction, through no-build areas or something along those lines. Can that be incorporated in the development agreement?
Yes, categorically yes. The only time you've pushed the development agreement too far is when it becomes what should be a legislative act at town meeting. In other words, we can't give the select board the authority of town meeting. So if it is an amendment to the zoning bylaw or it is distinctively zoning, that is left to town meeting. If it's contractual relative to offers and acceptances from the developer or from the landowner to the town, that's the development agreement. And everything that you mentioned, Madam Chair, could reasonably fit within the development agreement.
Okay, so just, I'm going to try and state what I think those things are, and I want board members to chime in if I've missed something. So we at our visioning session identified perimeter buffers. We identified basically a pathway through the site that incorporated, if you will, a greenway. and saved mature trees, but it really did also have the trail that leads up to Browns Hill. We had an open space set aside between Kerr Hall and the Retreat House, and we also provided some areas for future expansion of the septic system or the addition of a septic system. And we identified Pilgrim Hall, the Retreat House, the barn adjacent to Pilgrim Hall, and the gatehouse. I think I may have said that twice. Now, I suppose that there would be some room to adjust those in the event that that after some period of time, there would be no interest in their reuse, but that's a footnote. So did I miss anything there in my recitation of our preferences?
Well, just a nuance within that, it's a detail, is if there was a retention pond, it would probably be an extension of the utility area and septic area.
Right.
So that'd be just a subset of that.
Right,
So-
so.
Wouldn't that become part of the concept plan, though? I mean, is it?
What I
but
just
you can't
said has
design
to
it yet.
be in the development agreement.
Right, but the
And it's also part of the concept plan.
right,
It's
I mean,
both.
they're delineated in the concept plan.
Right, but if you were to go forward with this concept plan and present it at town meeting.
No, I get it. I'm just saying, you've enumerated what you think is in the concept.
Oh, right, okay. And I was just wondering if I missed anything, and I don't know that I did.
So, and the other thing is, we haven't publicly gone through these potential uses and prohibited uses, which are kind of basic to any kind of zoning we might do. So that might be helpful.
Right. Perhaps, since Mr. Whitten is now engaged with us, if we go and have our questions answered, we can conclude with that very thing, Rick, because I would actually like to entertain a motion that we recommend that certain uses be prohibited. I think that if we...
That's why we would go through this.
Yes, exactly, but we can do that at the end. But, so...
Madam Chair, could I just interrupt for 1 second? I apologize if I'm interrupting the flow. It's just,
No.
it's difficult from a distance. I wanted just to comment on the prohibited uses and just make a suggestion. It's deferential to the board and town meeting. I never like the idea of listing prohibited uses because you'll never be all encompassing. You'll never think of the nuance in the phraseology. When something's prohibited, the question is, does that allow that which is not explicitly prohibited? So a good rule of thumb in drafting zoning, in my opinion, is if it's not allowed by right or by special permit, it's categorically prohibited. And that allows the board and town meeting not to have to worry about, did we leave something out? Did we not be specific enough? If it's not explicitly provided as an allowable use, it's explicitly prohibited. And that's a good rule of thumb with zoning as a suggestion.
It's an excellent suggestion, and it really works. I only mentioned those prohibited uses because it was my understanding that the seminary had voiced concern about some uses. But your statement is the solution to the problem. So unless it's explicitly allowed, it's prohibited.
Yeah, yeah. And that's generally a good rule for the bylaw as a whole.
Right.
So, given what you've seen and heard, John, what would you suggest our next step be?
Well, I think I can get you something to react to. I have a lot of information. It'll be rough around the edges, of course, but I think I can frame out a bylaw for you. And that's really been kind of my charge all along, is to take your substance and I'll do the architecture and the framing for your response. There'll be a lot of missing pieces. For example, I'm not 100% sure I understand your opinion about what should be by right versus adjudicative permit. It seems like the lower campus residential uses, reuse of existing structures, make that by right, but require site plan review.
Yep.
I think the mixed-use approaches should generally be by special permit. And obviously, if it's heavier in terms of use, impact, and anything related to that, then it should always be by special permit. I think, I know your bylaw pretty well, and you've got a very strong site plan provisions. We could make site plan a trigger for all uses with a very, very low threshold that triggers it. And then the other piece that, to answer your question a little bit more in detail, that I wanted to get to, I'll say it now, the special permit can have a sliding scale. In other words, not all special permits have to be the same. There could be a very easy special permit, and there could be a very difficult special permit. And the determination will be in the language, how we write it. A special permit shall be granted if, now that sounds like it's close to a by right, versus a special permit shall only be granted provided that the applicant prove the following. That's a very difficult special permit. The reason I mention that is there may be uses that the board members in town meeting aren't quite sure about. You're nervous about them, but you think they might be attractive for the site. Well, make those more difficult to obtain. And then there will be uses by special permit that you are good with, provided that you folks get to adjudicate and issue a decision with perhaps conditions. Make that an easier special permit. I know I'm adding another level of complexity, but it's already a complex project. Why not fine tune it even further? And that's what I'm ready to start drafting for the board's kind of reaction. Like, no, you left this out, or this is too macro, or this is too micro.
I have a follow-up question to that discussion, which circles back around to traffic. You talk about a scale of difficulty of setting the special permit bar, and a different question, but related to that, is if we get toward the end of the development of this project and we find that we're reaching really the limits of what traffic can sustain, my specific question is, could a traffic study be a gating element to reducing or limiting density, or would it always just be a condition that's applied to a special permit where you have to add a four-way stop or a traffic light to mitigate something? So it's a fundamental, and I think I'm right at the crux of that gray area between zoning and development agreement. Is can you gate density on a traffic study?
Yeah, it's a great question. You can, but I don't recommend it. And the problem is, and I hope I'm not insulting anybody listening, but traffic is an art, not a science, because the issues of level of service are very subjective. I know they're based on objective criteria, but they're really not. The willingness to wait X seconds to make a left turn lane, it's very subjective. So yes, the planning board can have special permit criteria upon which they rely to deny or approve with conditions a project because of traffic impact. But I'd worry about your counsel defending that action in court. And the reason why is the subjectivity of traffic. If we had an objective standard, and that's why I like maximums, because it's objective. Everyone can agree that it is what it is. Traffic is too squishy. So I think you would want, if that is the board's goal, to make sure that it's not the final straw that breaks the back. It'll be like the third or the fourth or the 10th project, not the first or the second. We could have a triggering mechanism, kind of a cumulative impact mechanism. We do that for water resources. Really, the work that I did for Gravelly Pond was on a carrying capacity basis. It's just really, really hard to do with traffic. So I would advise a more objective means of determining what the ceiling is if you're not going to do it numerically. And if I could just add one more piece, Jonathan, I think with traffic, the board, if it's a special permit, will always have the right to require a traffic study, mitigation analysis, and so on. I think the problem is how the board uses that to make a decision other than a left turn lane or get a warrant for a new traffic light. It really puts the board in a tough spot, because you're getting all this traffic mumbo jumbo and you're really not sure how to make it applicable to an approval or a denial. So I'm not a big fan of using traffic as a means of denying or mitigating impact of a project. You'll usually get argued out of it. You know, the competing traffic engineers are just going to argue with you to convince you that it's not as bad as it may seem. I think we should find a better criteria to use, a better objective criteria to use.
I guess a follow-up question, and maybe someone else would need to answer this, is I think the board has a bit of a handicap in figuring out what the upper limit is in relationship to traffic. In other words, the challenge is figuring out what the number is, the magic number.
Yeah.
It seems that
Agreed.
the
I totally agree. I
infrastructure
think
and
that's
parking
right. And in traffic and wastewater flow and water supply and, you know, kind of all of the fundamental characteristics of new development causing impact, which ones are the straw that breaks the back? And I think in this case, it's really difficult because we don't have a developer. You know, we don't have a project. We have potential projects, and they all are going to have slightly different traffic generators.
So basically what you're saying, is it's sort of like the problem of putting the cart before the horse.
Well, I just looked at the maximum density in the concept plans that's presented. That's helpful to kind of get a guesstimate or how many people could actually be at this site. And I think that maximum density and what you could develop and what the infrastructure is going to support is actually the gating limit there. Because I know we discussed last time around 1,000 people, I think, going there a day now.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Around that area.
I
And that
think
seemed
there
like
was-
the right, I mean, you look at the square footage of these buildings, the only question mark is the commercial, and depends on what kind of business it is, obviously, if there is a commercial development that's there. But it's a pretty good, I think your max density is just about where you want it.
Yeah.
If you guesstimate how many people are in that development, it's about where you think it would be for what that infrastructure supports. As far as like how much water you want that property to use,
Right.
how much you have to treat, how many cars are going there a day. It seems to be that's the upper limit.
So what you're saying, Pat, is that the highest density concept plan that Emil and Jonathan produced yields the maximum density, if you will,
It's an example, it just at first glance,
from your
quick
experience.
numbers, it seemed to be what it should be able to support as a maximum
Right.
in that plan. Of course, there's variations to it.
And there actually isn't, I was looking at the square footage development, at least on the housing part, there's only a 15% difference between medium and maximum.
Median and maximum are basically the same density.
Yeah, they're very close.
Yeah. As far as infrastructure use.
But wouldn't
I
you
would
have,
like
you'd
to-
have more people because that congregate living? Wouldn't that mean, because if I just figured out,
But you'd have less traffic.
right. And I think that's important too. It's not just how many residents, but I think the type of resident is something to consider because, like you said, not everybody's gonna be
I
traveling.
don't think too many of them in the assisted living are going to
Correct.
be driving, I hope.
So that's an advantage there.
Yeah.
I would like to see the concept plan have two options for the upper. Everything we've always seen is the presumed that the buildings will be repurposed and maybe additional buildings will be added for commercial. An alternative for the upper, because it has such height and views, would be 55-plus senior housing project, such as you see in Topsfield on the Great Hill.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
very, very successful. And a project like that would actually net the town the same amount of money as would New England Biolabs, actually. I've run the numbers. So rather than just presume, I'd love to see, a little diagram with some kind of 50-plus housing project put in, 50, 60 units, how would it look, as opposed to, an infill additional commercial development. And I think having a concept plan which distinctly recognizes those two options would be very good.
Oh, well, I think that comes in the, and Jonathan can correct me, John Witten. That comes in the bylaw, and that's what I spoke to earlier, is, you're right, if that commercial development doesn't come to fruition, it has to have an alternate potential use. So my question and concern is,
even though we have 3 distinct zones in a concept plan, can you incorporate a use beyond commercial in the upper? I mean, we're talking about commercial in the upper, but it shouldn't be exclusively commercial. It should have the potential to morph into something else.
No, I actually agree with you, and I think
That would be-
probably everyone does. I think maybe the thought was that the demolition cost might be prohibitive, but.
No. They're
Yeah.
they're very small, actually. Scraping the top of the hill is not that much money.
Okay, well, I think you're absolutely right, though, is that upper campus needs to have the option of residential development
Yeah, that would-
along with
that was-
some type of commercial development. And can I ask this question, just because it's on my mind, and this is something that's inherent in how this site will be developed over time. It seems to me, in some senses, that it's easy to look at this site as first come, first serve. And I could see a real potential downside if some developer came and said, I want to take half of Kerr Hall. That would preclude scraping off the entire buildings and having valuable 55. Yeah, so, how can the planning board prioritize development or even reject development if it doesn't yield the kind of results that maybe a wait-and-see approach would produce?
I think,
Yeah, I think anything that would involve reducing any existing building a significant amount, and you can put a percentage on that, would kind of change the scheme up there. So I think there has to be an alternative, number one, and it could be an alternative use. But I think that has to be the second step in the code. I mean, initially, we assumed that the buildings would stay, but that's a big assumption, too. So I think it could go strictly residential, in which case it would be a different configuration up there, which would have different requirements in the code. So we'd have to do a
So
study on that.
my guess is, if I'm correct in hearing John, is the concept plan could then be amended, and by town meeting, you come back and say, well, market forces are dictating that we really remove those buildings and go to residential. And I think what John said is that would go to town meeting and say, well, you approve a concept plan and that had commercial up there, but it's not working. We want to change that to, X number of units.
Well, I think the question really is not necessarily that sequencing. Can the code actually include alternatives?
Right, that was the original question.
Well, yeah, that's the original, but
I think you wanna
would hate
leave-
to keep
I
going
think you
back
wanna
to
come
town
out of-
meeting to amend it, if you could include
Yeah.
two
I think you want
concepts.
to come out of the gate with that as an option. Otherwise,
Well, that's what she's
Yeah.
saying.
yeah,
that's what I'm
otherwise
saying.
people may
So
be
I
scared
want to
off.
hear, I want to hear the answer from John.
So I have two comments. One is I've heard two different questions, and they're both really important. One is, what happens if the plan of developing the upper campus never materializes, but just the lower campus, and then the middle campus, and then the upper campus, which is the one we really want, doesn't happen until the end? Then we have all the cumulative impact of traffic and so on. Is there any way that the bylaw could affect the timing of the development of the 3 campuses, arguably saying there's 3? And the answer is there could be. That could be part of a development agreement if the seminary is willing to do that, and or it could be part of the bylaws. So we certainly can have growth management timing and zoning bylaws, very, very common. We could say that the sequencing of the development of this concept plan is as follows. I don't know if the seminary would be comfortable with that, but we certainly could have that, and town meeting could approve it. Then the second question that I heard is, could there be plan B if plan A is not attractive to a developer? Yes, absolutely. It's a great idea, and we should bake that in, meaning we're offering 3 options. I'm just saying this argumentatively. We offer 3 options for the middle campus. You can choose A, B, or C. A requires a special permit, B is by right, and C is a hybrid, something like that. So yeah, and I think that's a wise move because we don't have a developer. I think all the work you've done and all the work that David and Barry have done is really helpful, but it's still not committing a developer to these concepts. So I think having alternative options that you're comfortable with, yeah, absolutely the way to go. And then the question I have for the board relative to all this is the underlying zoning is residential. And when we're developing an overlay, my presumption is you want to leave the underlying district alone and allow the overlay as an option. But that's a question we do need to have answered. Are we leaving the underlying residential as is and giving the landowner / developer the right to choose overlay or underlying? And that's an important question, I think, based on everything we've talked about tonight.
Yeah, and if I were, and this is just my personal opinion, is I would not allow that. I would, because it kind of undermines what we're trying to do here. We're trying to maximize and save the potential of the land.
Yeah.
And the last thing we want to do is single-family housing up there.
I think there might be agreement among board members on that.
Yeah.
Would anybody disagree with what Rick just said?
No.
I guess we're only thinking about the underlay being the residential option, yeah?
Yes,
It's single family on,
Single family, 1 acre.
40,000.
1 acre,
1 acre
single-family.
Does the site also check the box on the estate overlay district or any other zoning we're not thinking of? Has anyone checked whether or not somebody could come? It's unlikely, I know, that anyone would come in with that, but,
It's R1B now as a zone.
yeah, but
There's not enough.
would be an allowed estate overlay?
They would have to assemble at least 10 acres to use the Great Estates bylaw.
But that site obviously has that.
True, but I can tell you, the Great Estates bylaw would not work there.
It would have to, it wouldn't work, because the way development works under the Great Estate bylaw, you have to start with the Great Estate, and the Great Estate is the retreat house. And my guess is that's not going to be the starting
not
point of
likely.
development on this site.
It's a dead on arrival.
It's not likely.
I looked at that. I actually looked at it and tried to figure out a way to make it work, and you'd have to disconnect it from the Great Estate, which in the case of this site,
Yeah, that was
it's very nice, but it's
Why is
not
that-
great.
Why is that true? Why couldn't you say, you can build single-family houses, but, oh, by the way, you have to take the retreat house and, condominiumize it or whatever you want, something that's not antagonistic to single-family houses.
Well, I just
I don't see
actually,
those two.
Well, you can. I don't think the special, I don't think the special permit's going to preclude that as an option. What we're talking about is the underlying zoning,
Right, not-
and I've already made my point. I want to get rid of that because it's just not a good use of this piece of property, and it will only encourage people to think, well, see if we can shoehorn that in. I'd rather be very clear about what we want and what are how you get it. And John has done a great job of explaining, you can have various levels of development, you can have it tied to a concept plan, you can make it easy for things you like and more difficult for things you don't know about. And you can, I think, if we're going to this level of effort, I don't want that there. It's not useful.
well, I think, I think that having some diverse housing stock would be beneficial for Hamilton. I mean, there's really no market rate housing, rental housing in Hamilton. Say, for example, you move from the Chicago area, and you don't know much about New England, and you're thinking of building a house in Hamilton or a neighboring town, but you'd like to get to know the area, and you have, maybe a couple of kids, and you want to rent a really nice apartment. Where do you go? There is no option here in Hamilton that I'm aware of. So I think having market rate rental housing and maybe town houses and that type of thing would be very attractive for people in
So.
moving to
does the-
Hamilton or moving within Hamilton.
So I think I've heard the board consensus is no single-family, no underlying zoning for single-family housing.
Bill, are you a holdout?
Can't hear you.
For the moment, I'm a holdout.
Okay, that's an abstention.
So I just have a quick comment on the top of the hill. One of the reasons that Emil and I didn't put too much effort into alternatives up there is because it doesn't have that many constraints, and I think that that could be a pretty low bar for residential up there. In other words, it doesn't need a really detailed concept plan. It already has its own built-in constraints. It's the very top of the hill's already disturbed and it has water tanks. Other than that, just stay away from the buffer. So it can be pretty simple.
So do we have a decision on the single-family, eliminating single-family from the underlying zoning?
Sounds like it.
Would you
Vote on
like
that
to
if you
make a
want.
motion?
I make a motion, we eliminate the underlying zoning for 1 acre single-family housing.
Second.
Just
Okay.
a question. Let me ask John Whitten, is that going to be useful information for you at this point?
It is. It's a little bit of a nuance because there always has to be at least one underlying use by right in all districts. So we can't require any district to require a special permit. Having said that, one way to accomplish it is as long as the overlying district has allowable uses by right, which we've been discussing. So I think we can handle that. It's just, again, removing all uses by right is the thing to avoid. So when we do the overlay, we just now need to make sure that it's one parcel, that there are allowable uses by right. And that, my sense, is the direction the board's taking anyway.
And this would be, again, with the idea of preserving the open space, which is part of that upper campus.
Right.
So that any housing would be off the,
Yeah, no, I
The
think what
open
he's
space.
talking is the by right that
Yeah.
we're talking about is the existing dormitories.
Right.
So once you have, if you have one part of it by right, you're good.
I see what you're saying, yeah.
Is that
okay.
true, John?
It is. The thing that we can't anticipate, and I'm really having trouble, I've been struggling with this from the beginning, is how to imagine the seminary selling off different components in terms of both frontage and access to the wastewater treatment plant and kind of all these moving parts. So right now, I'm treating this as a 102-acre parcel, and we need to have allowable uses by right, and we will. So that allows us to fulfill the board's past motion, which is remove the underlying residential district, but reinsert residential uses by right, just in a different configuration than what you have as the underlying district.
And
I have a question. So on each of the campuses, do we have to have by right? You know how we've divided it into three
no.
sections, or just
No,
over the,
just one.
that's, okay. I
That's
just
what he
wanna
said.
make sure.
He's
Perfect.
treating the whole thing as a
whole.
102
Okay.
acre.
And one just real quick question. If we do have some residential by right, can it still be subject to site plan review so we can keep the cohesiveness of the whole concept plan?
It can, and I'll tell the board what the board is very well familiar with, so I excuse my lecturing, I don't mean to do it, but you cannot use site plan to defeat an otherwise use by right.
Okay.
So your site plan becomes very weak or weakened when it's a use by right, but yes, you still apply site plan review, but you wouldn't be able to deny or impose conditions that would lead to a denial or tantamount to a denial if the use is by right.
Okay, so, for example, dormitories A and B, we could say, as of right use, residential use, subject to site plan review, and we're good to go.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so let's do our roll call vote before we forget. Jonathan Poor,
Aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Aye.
Beth Herr,
Aye.
Rick Mitchell,
Aye.
Richard Boroff,
Aye.
Marty Crouch, aye. We accomplished something today.
Well, also, we need to go through this list before we, of things that we want to allow.
Right, but let's get my questions answered, because
Oh,
I
you're not
have
done yet.
Oh, did you look in your packet?
Well, I've gotten through some of it, but
Okay, so.
obviously you've got more.
Oh, no, I have many. So with respect to the Dover Amendment, that was one of my questions, because right now, we are unaware of whether the seminary intends to remain or have a presence on the campus for, say, a year or more, or even longer into the future, or whether it intends to move at the first opportunity. And so with that said, as if it were to remain in one of the buildings, whether it could continue to assert its rights under the Dover Amendment and 10.7 of our bylaw, or whether the adoption of the zoning overlay district would have the effect of abolishing any reliance on the Dover Amendment, or whether the development agreement could, we could require that the seminary waive any reliance on the Dover Amendment.
So the Dover Amendment applies to religious or educational uses that are providing a religious or educational mission, and it's a pretty loose definition that we've seen in case law. So what I'd say is the overlay district should allow for religious and educational uses consistent with Dover. So as long as the bylaw deals with that head on, then the seminary will not be stuck with a conflicting bylaw that prohibits the very use that they're protected from having, or for having. So I'm not worried about the Dover Amendment. If the seminary chooses to stay in one of the three campuses, or two of the three campuses, they will still be protected as a religious and educational institution and practice. So the overlay district will get somewhat nullified if the seminary stays. But that's simply the way Dover works. If the seminary vacates the property in total, then Dover disappears, because the Dover protection only applies if it's an educational or religious use. So there's no vested rights to Dover if the seminary leaves. It doesn't run with the land. The protections that are afforded the college, the seminary, are lost. If they stay, they're maintained. If they leave, they're lost. If they stay, the seminary stays only on the upper campus and not the middle or the lower, then the Dover protections will apply to where they are practicing religious and educational uses. That begs the question that I was saying before, I'm having a hard time understanding conceptually, is how will the seminary divvy up the property so that they stay on the upper campus and carve out the middle and the lower? I haven't figured that one out yet, and that part of that is trying to get into the seminary's head in terms of their long-term plans. But in any event, as long as the bylaw, the overlay, includes religious and educational uses, we're good.
Well, it sort of defeats the concept plan, though. So if they
You know-
remain, whatever concept plan exists for the upper campus is meaningless.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And that again is the problem. We're crafting a bylaw for a player to be named later. You know, we don't know who's coming. So we have to presume all sorts of scenarios. Yes, it's true. If the seminary stays on the upper campus, the seminary gets the protections of Dover, and the overlay district, for the most part, will be ineffective as it applies to the seminary. That's absolutely correct.
So, so this speaks to Ken and Merwin. The sooner you can give clarity to the planning board on your plans for the future, the better. And especially when we get to town meeting and that becomes a question, that really is going to be a fly in the ointment to getting this passed.
That is a little bit difficult, because it sort of makes the work of the planning board a little
and
bit
void.
futile. So yes, it would be helpful if we knew, and yes, it does present a little bit of a difficulty. And then let me just review my Well, that was an answer I wasn't anticipating. I actually thought that the overlay district would have the effect of nullifying the Dover Amendment.
Oh, no, because Dover Amendment's a federal law, right?
No, it's a
State law.
State? Oh, I
Yeah,
thought it was
Mass
federal.
General Law, Chapter 48, Section 3. I
Okay,
looked into it.
my mistake.
Yeah, it is supreme, and it is a preemptive act of the state against local governments, and it goes way back. So just a ton of case law of recent vintage. So no, there's no ability to nullify the protections that the seminary has.
Right, but, that's the interesting thing, because my research with respect to the Dover Amendment indicated that not only did it apply to the buildings, it applied to the land. So again, to your point, how do you divvy this up if they remain on the campus? I mean, arguably, you could say the Dover Amendment applies to the entire campus because they're there.
Yeah, well, if that would be, if nothing else changed, then I would agree. 102 acres, dormitories spread out, buildings everywhere. The entire campus is subject to the benefits of Dover. If the seminary were to start to carve the parcel into, let's say, A, B, and C, then I think a fair argument is made if C goes to New England Biolabs, just because that name's been used, that no longer is an educational purpose, or religious purpose. So the Dover Amendment would be lost relative to the New England Biolabs section. But we don't know because we don't know. We don't know what the future holds in the seminary's eyes.
Wow, interesting.
That's another question about state law, whether that in the future would override any development agreement in the event there is something, say, in an environmental kind of issue that were to pop up. Is that true? Does the state law override?
So I'm hearing two questions there, Emil. Tell me if I'm missing. One is, does Dover supersede
No, it's not
a
Dover
local
so
bylaw
much.
that
If there's a
is
change in-
environmental or wetland protection? No, and that's where Dover becomes very nuanced. So the planning board can require site plan review for a church, but it can't require a special permit. It could require site plan review for ingress and egress and lighting and shade trees, but it couldn't lead to a denial. So we do know that the court is upheld, and the statute references it. The court will uphold a bylaw's application of site plan, but categorically prohibit the requirement of a special permit. And I represent Mass Audubon, and we have been pursuing that issue across the Commonwealth. You can't require a special permit for educational or religious uses. So the first question, though, is whether there is an environmental constraint that might be overridden by Dover. Probably not. Dover only ensures that a church or a college gets to practice what they do unimpeded by local government with a few restrictions. So there's some interference by local government, but not enough leading to a denial.
It was, yeah, just to clarify, it was, the question wasn't related to the Dover Amendment at all, but to whether change in state law, because one of the benefits in a development agreement is to freeze a regulatory system for some specified period of time.
Yeah, I apologize. I misunderstood your question. Yeah,
So the
now I do
town-
understand. No, I mean, it's a contract, and the freedom of contract supersedes just about everything. So if the seminary willingly enters into agreement with the town, the only thing we worry about is that public policy. Did we kind of hoodwink the seminary into signing something that they shouldn't have upon reflection? They're represented by excellent counsel. It's a sophisticated organization. I'm not worried about that.
Yeah, okay.
Then I had some other questions, and I know that there's a mortgage on this property, and as in most mortgages, there's a due-on-sale clause in that mortgage, and what a due-on-sale clause means, for those uninitiated, is that if a mortgagor sells a portion of its property without the consent of the lender, it constitutes an event of default, and the mortgagee can declare that event of default and then take whatever actions it's empowered to take under the terms of its mortgage. So it would seem to me that if the seminary is going to sell all or a portion, but particularly a portion of this property, it would have to obtain its lender's consent. And I wonder whether then, under those circumstances, the lender should be a party to the development agreement.
It's a great question, and I appreciated your questions, Madam Chair. I'll tell you, I know nothing about bankruptcy law, so I can't comment on, on the relevance of it to a zoning change.
It's actually not relevant to a zoning change per se, but it's relevant to going forward with an overlay district if the lender's not on board with the plans of the seminary, because it could end up being just a phenomenal waste of everyone's time.
Yeah, no, and I picked up on that, and I think that gets back to the seminary needs to be part of this conversation, and I know they want to be, because I agree with you. I would say this, though, about your question. Generally speaking, the development agreement is signed by the landowner and only the landowner, because we don't know who the future landowners are. I don't know whether the mortgagee would be a willing signator on a development agreement. And frankly, from the town's perspective, kind of my job protecting the town, all I need is the seminary's signature to ensure that it runs with the land and to have this as a recorded instrument so the world is on notice. Whether the mortgagee would sign, I really don't know. It's a fabulous question. I just don't know.
Yeah, and you're kind of I know you practice bankruptcy law, but you're presupposing if there's an approved overlay district, the bank's going to go, well, this property is a hell of a lot more valuable than it was as a zone for single-family housing or in its existing condition. So it's not like they're going to go, we're taking the money and I don't care what happens to you. They're going to look at the reality of, okay, they have other campuses too.
Oh, no, excuse me, their mortgage just encumbers the one.
Yeah, I know, but I think we're digging into the weeds a little too far. We don't have control over that. And it could happen, but
Well, no, really, the gist of it is to ascertain whether or not the seminary and its lender are on the same page with respect to the seminary's agreements with the town. Because really...
Yeah, but the bank isn't going to be looking at this going, they want to know, they've pledged the we don't know what assets they've pledged. Presumably it runs with the land and the buildings. It could run with other campuses. We're not parties to that.
No, I read the mortgage, Rick. It's on record at the Essex South Registry of Deeds. I read the mortgage.
That's fine, Marnie, but we're not in bankruptcy court here. So trying to presuppose what the economics of the mortgage and the asset base is getting way too far into the weeds. So I understand why you're asking it. John has given the best answer he can. We can't answer that question, and I don't think pursuing that's getting us to where we need to go.
Well, I think it's a legitimate question for the seminary, because the last thing we need to do is to see the foreclosure notice in the paper, shortly after town meeting. I mean, these are just considerations that any attorney worth their salt would have on their agenda to evaluate. So let's see.
Jonathan, could I ask you one question? If we had a signed development agreement with the seminary and the bank were to take over the property, wouldn't they be subject to that development agreement?
They should be, yeah, because I would never advise allowing the mortgagee out of it because it's the successors and the signs that we're concerned about. So absolutely.
Right, so that would protect.
It would bind them.
that would bind them. But I would, when I wrote successors and assigns, I would say including any and all mortgagees that may hold an interest in the property. So there you have it. So if that's the answer, that may be good enough. But it is something to consider. And then there's just some other aspects to this that have been alluded to before. And again, I don't know how this should be handled, whether in a development agreement or whatnot. So you have multiple purchasers on the site, but there are aspects to this site which require consensus among the owners, and that would include the maintenance of the septic system, the maintenance of any undeveloped portions of the property. And so I don't know whether there's some type of condominium association contemplated so that aspects of this development can proceed in a manner that, A, doesn't generate litigation among owners as they become liable for some costs associated with that ownership. And so I don't know to what extent it implicates the zoning, but it does in the sense that we're trying to code for different sections of the campus, and how does this all work? It just seems to be very amorphous at the present time, so I don't know if anybody's given any thought to that.
I can offer this, Madam Chair, and again, your questions were excellent, and I do understand the kind of the angst because we don't know what the future is going to hold after the zoning. So the development agreement could be negotiated to tie some of these loose ends so that the current developer, current owner, seminary would require on conveyance of A, B, and C a requirement for a condominium association arrangement so that the land is owned by a condominium, that there be a master agreement that ties the three sections together. We can include all that. I think the problem is going to be for the seminary, they don't know what the future holds for A, B, and C either. So here's my fallback. If all works, we'll have a development agreement with the seminary that will run with the land regardless of what happens to A, B, and C. They then, the taker of A, B, and C, will be responsible under the development agreement and zoning. And the only piece to worry about then, kind of, is only the portion that is only by right. So if it's the lower campus residential, the dormitories, if that is the only by rights portion, that is the only part that the planning board will lose control over relative to a special permit. So you won't be able to make carrying capacity decisions. You won't be able to impose large scale requirements under site plan review because it's by right. The other two campuses, B and A, the upper and the middle, those would be by special permit, presumably, and that would give the planning board the power to look at cumulative impact. If the development of the site, though, is upper, middle, and then lower, that raises the issue that Jonathan was mentioning a little while ago, which is what happens if we get stuck with a traffic problem? Now what do we do? If the by right campus is the last part to be developed, then it's by right, you won't be able to impose conditions of approval. So that ties us back to the sequencing that I mentioned earlier, and it ties back to a more robust development agreement. But because the development agreement is bilateral, we need the seminary on board, we can't count on it. So I think we have to proceed with zoning in the sense that we think we're going to get a development agreement, but we're not sure what that development's going to read because we're not there yet. So I would say the development agreement is going to be signed by the seminary, nobody else, but it's going to bind the future uses as best we can, and then belt and suspenders the special permit for the middle and the upper campus.
Well, I guess in a sense, I have a practical problem because the second developer and the third developer are going to have questions about their liability for costs associated with the septic system. And of course, the first developer is not going to want to continue underwriting those costs. So it would seem to me there has to be some mechanism in place, to attract development where those costs are apportioned by lot size, if you will. And without that, I would find that marketing the site would be a little difficult. If I were marketing the property, I would want to have the answer to that question before I took the ad out in the New York Times.
Marnie, the alternate is they could develop their own waste treatment system within their own zone. They don't have to tie into the existing one.
Well, that's an additional cost. I mean,
Yeah.
much less cost to apportion.
Well, we don't know if it could handle all the development that is being proposed, because we don't know what the type of development is. We know we have some parameters, but if New England Biolabs decide to go up at the top of the hill, they're going to have some special treatment system of their own. It's not going to feed into just a secondary treatment, which is what I think is there. So that doesn't bother me that much, because it's infrastructure. Okay, it's a cost. You're right. If they can tie into the existing one, great. If they can't or don't want to, then they have to figure out an alternate.
Yeah, I would just add, Madam Chair, if this is helpful, and I appreciate your concern, and I think it's a good one. And it's again, we have a kind of a canvas, but we're not sure who's showing up where. I don't think you should worry about that because I think our job is to create the anticipatory zoning that the town wants with an applicant that's willing to negotiate a development agreement. I think the concerns you're raising are real and serious, but I don't think they're the board's concern at this point. I think if you get a special permit application, those are reasonable questions. What are you doing about wastewater? What are you doing about stormwater? And what's the arrangement with the other parties on the site? I think that's all relevant at the special permit site plan review stage. I think we don't know enough, or we don't have enough knowledge to know about the future. I think now our job is to create an attractive zoning piece that fulfills the blueprint that the town wants. Those are real questions you raise, and those are developer questions, and I'd be worried about those if I were representing the developer, but I'm not as worried about them representing the board.
I think a lot of the things being discussed might be easier done and commented on when reviewing the draft development agreement in overlay district. So like just looking at the timeline, given the hour, and today is the 7th, and we're supposed to have the first draft edits available for review. There's only one more hearing before the hearing we're supposed to approve it 3 days prior to it being attached to a public hearing warrant. It's not a lot of, we're only like talking about things without looking at a document. It's not a lot of time. The study draft was due yesterday. Is there a draft in the works or close to? Have we answered all the questions needed to get one in place?
So I can have a draft for the board by the end of the week. That's not a problem at all. But I did mention to the chair, and with permission, I'd like to mention this to the board. I think your schedule is too aggressive. I really do. My job is to protect the town and the board, and I don't think, no matter how hard I work, and I'm willing to work as hard as you want me to, I don't think we can meet the April town meeting deadline. I've been in touch with the town manager. I think I have Joe's permission, I hope I do, to suggest to the board to consider a special in June, to give the board more time, to take some sting out of that timeline. This is a really complicated process, and it's not my problem. I think it's going to be the public's problem. We're talking about a kind of a 3-level chess game here that is going to take a fair bit of explaining and kind of public relations. So that's my opinion, and that's all it is. I don't have the authority to make this statement. I'm just giving you my gut feeling not to rush a bylaw this complicated. And also, it's a dual problem because we need to be able to say to town meeting, we have almost completed a development agreement. So the developer will be on the hook in perpetuity for this contract. I cannot imagine having that done in the next several weeks. That's a lot of back and forth negotiation between the select board and the seminary. So that's my opinion, members of the board. I think you should take a little bit more time because I think you can do it, but I would not rush something like this.
Well, thank you for that, because frankly, the schedule that we were provided with and that Emil blew up and made more real was one that we initially received from Joe. And so when we started looking at this closely, both on January 10th and January 17th, and when I sat down to kind of think about all the issues that remained outstanding, I thought to myself it would be quite difficult to get this job done, particularly because we really don't know where the public stands on this. And it would be really helpful to not rush through any public hearing, but really invite participation from the public when we consider some of the components of a draft that you were to provide us with. As you say, it's 3-dimensional chess, and anyone who plays chess knows it's a difficult game, but in 3 dimensions it's even harder. So I don't really envy your job of trying to craft an overlay district that can account for say different types of uses on the upper campus and how that works. And also to have different permitting procedures for different uses in different sectors of the campus. So does anyone at the board want to keep rushing this process or take
I
advantage
want
of?
to let Jonathan go to work and see what he produces.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I
So we
think-
have something to react to.
Yeah.
Starting point.
I like
Starting
I
point.
like the pressure. We should keep going, but I think John has made a very valid point that this is a very complex, and it's going to impact the single largest piece of property in town. And there's a gestation period. There's a political gestation period for this, and an education. There's going to need to be a significant amount of education of the public once we have educated ourselves and crafted a draft bylaw. So it may be that maybe if we can get to town meeting with, we're at 70% or 90% of the way and say, okay, here's the outlines of what it is that we are proposing. We're not asking you for a vote today, or we could ask for a sense of whatever we decide to do, and keep working on it. And it's going to be the education public hearing process that's going to be the most time consuming, because we can't sidestep that. And because if we do, then we know it'll ultimately fail.
Well, that I agree with you, Rick. I think that the town meeting is a real opportunity to educate the citizens and not just the residents who would appear via Zoom at our regular meetings, but introduce a larger number of people to what is being planned for the site. But also, we have to we have to evaluate what we do, not just in terms of 1 or 2 years, but we really, this work that we do here will affect the town for years to come. I mean, the development agreement will run with the land, and what we plan for the site can be of enormous benefit to the town, but if we act too precipitously, we could not consider the unintended consequences of something that we might do if it were rushed.
The only question I'd ask in agreeing to extend the period is not to presume that the consultants would recommend extending it to increase their fee, but is this a lump sum proposal? Or are we doing it, is there going to be a change order for another $60,000?
What consultants are we talking about?
Well, the ones engaged on our behalf and on behalf of the seminary to develop what's being developed here, so they're getting paid to do
Are
this.
we talking about Barry and David?
Yeah, and maybe John as well?
Well, John's on time, he's on the clock.
John's on the clock.
He's not.
He's on our clock.
There's no way.
There's obviously a financial impact to us extending the period of this
Oh, yeah.
exercise, so just would raise my hand to say that's a consideration in the extension, but agreeing that we should do it and take our time and get it right, but just knowing that it's going to make it more
Well,
expensive.
there are separate agreements here, though. Abramson Associates and now it's Barry Abramson and David Gamble, they have one contract with the town.
That's right.
And then Mr. Whidden here has been engaged in a separate agreement to assist us in doing this overlay district.
Right.
Just another consideration that we're spending
Well,
money to increase
we don't basically have a choice. David and Barry are 90% done of their project. Really, the remaining is to tidy up, get the findings from the last public meeting, and then they were, last big piece is they were going to make a presentation at town meeting of their findings and recommendations or from their assessment. We'll have to figure out how that fits. We may say, hey, we want to change that to some other service that helps the planning board present this.
Okay.
I don't know what that is, but
Yeah.
there's a chunk of scope that hasn't been expended that we might say, well, okay, we don't need that at town meeting, or we do. But
Poor
then
Jonathan and Amy's fee is going to go up for sure.
But then we have to do a presentation at town meeting, and at town meeting, you're gonna have maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15, to try and describe this.
But then will there be discussion that will add on to all that time?
Who?
Huh? Will there be discussion at town meeting by the town meeting members of what we present?
Well, that's to be determined. I was just suggesting it might be an education opportunity and say,
I agree.
we're 95% of the way there. Here are the elements, the primary elements. We could potentially ask, if we thought it was useful, a specific question, on do you like scheme A or scheme B, or, I don't know.
Is there some kind of intermittent agreement that we can enter with the seminary saying they won't do anything until that town meeting happens, at least in June? You know what I mean? Like, there's a risk of having all this resource spent and time and effort, and
Well, that's a fair question.
seminary leaves and
That's
they
a
can't agree with the timeline that we're
That was a
presenting.
question I asked of Scott Sundquist when I sat down with breakfast with him
Yeah.
back in June. I said, "What's the time frame?" And
Just don't know if it
and
works
the
for
only
them, too.
answer I got was that they expected to be substantially off the campus or entirely off the campus by the end of 2024. But I don't know if that date was a hard date or a planning date. But that's a fair question, is to say, this is going to stretch. This could end up going to fall town meeting for all we know. And so we need to know sort of the parameters of what we're operating in. What's the time horizon? And we haven't gotten clarity on, are they going to stay in some portion, or are they going to leave entirely, and when?
Well, has the working group met recently? Do you know? No?
Nope.
Because to my knowledge, the only information that we have received was from Joe Demilovitz, and that was the slides that were presented at the January 26th meeting. But we, or at least I have never seen a summary of what was learned from the first workshop. So
Well, I think
some of
this,
the
I think this,
information that the associates, Abramson and Associates were to produce, the planning board has yet to see, and I don't know if you've seen
well,
it.
and that may be, you know, that may be how we adjust the scope. We may say, we'd like you guys to come like John has tonight, and let's discuss your findings and get detailed answers to our questions to inform our decision-making. And, you know, I actually had suggested that potential to Joe. That may be in a slight expansion of the scope, but, you know, at this point in time, we can't be, you know, pinching pennies. You know, the better informed we are and the public is on what the product is of, that everybody is doing, it's going to only benefit all of us.
Right. Does anyone else have any more questions for Mr. Whitten?
That at this time.
Well, thank you, John. I feel very comfortable working with John because I feel like I'm getting straight answers to direct questions. So thank you so much, because this is waters we have not tread before, and having your expertise is greatly appreciated.
Right.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, and thank you. And if the end of the week was acceptable for the board, I'm happy to get you something as a draft. Frankly, the weekend would be a little better for me if that's acceptable.
No, that's acceptable. Do you by any chance have any overlay districts from other communities that you might consult as models, or are you looking at our Willow Street overlay district? Just out of curiosity.
So I've looked at your overlay districts. I've written a lot of overlay districts. I wrote your inclusionary bylaw, which I didn't realize that Hamilton had adopted. So I'd be happy to send you those, but let me send you an original one for the seminary. And the reason why is I think this one is unique enough. I mean, an overlay is an overlay, but this one is unique such that I think trying to copy or even crib from a previous overlay won't work. I mean, I'm not saying I'm doing this out of whole cloth. We all kind of reinvent the wheel sometimes with overlays and zoning, but I do think this has to be unique enough because of the campus segregation. So that's a long-winded answer saying, Madam Chair, I'd prefer not to send you examples, but if the board would like them, I can list out a bunch. Absolutely, I'd be happy to do that. But let me give you something more original to work with relative to kind of the presentation tonight and what David has drawn up the past couple weeks.
Sounds good to me.
I don't know what you're thinking, Marnie, but I'd rather have John take more time and give us a more complete document.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
So I don't feel like I have to have it Friday versus Monday.
No,
Or
that's-
next Tuesday, because the more clarity and definition we have, the better. That's just my opinion.
Emil, did you send your PowerPoint to Mr. Whitten?
No, but I will.
Yeah, thank you, Emil. That would be very helpful because a lot of really critical information there. So thank you.
Sure.
And can you send it to all of us electronically?
I can send you a PDF if you want, or the PowerPoint, either one.
Send
PDF.
both.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I assume, yeah, yes, please.
I just want to say thank you to both of you, because I feel like we talked about the importance of what we're going to present to the public, and this at least gives them something to see and is more tangible. Do you know what I'm saying? So I just felt like that was very helpful.
Okay, what next, Madam Chair?
I just wanted to mention one thing in your
yes.
packet
Oh, yes.
there, that,
This is to your point, Rick.
and I think Patrick sent this out. Did you this afternoon to the planning board?
Yes, I did.
Okay, the residential and special district zones, there's a description in there, it's several pages long. So this is sort of an accompanying document to the site plans that were developed on the different densities, just to give more description about what's entailed within each zone. And then there's kind of a matrix, a list there, or a chart of land use and permit requirements that listed things that are potential uses, and it's a chart to be filled out as homework assignment.
What Emo is referring to looks like this. It has his items that he sent me this afternoon. The calendar is on the first part.
Printed both sides, yeah.
It then has the purposes of residential, special district
Right.
zones. And then after that, it gets into zones with land use and permit requirements. So it's in a different document
It's
than.
just kind of a comprehensive, setup that would kind of trigger some kind of response, I think, to specific uses. I think John Witten had indicated he would like to have some kind of breakdown on uses.
Right, well, I'm wondering if, Marnie has this list, I'm wondering if we want to go over that list as our final.
That's the overlay, that's the Willow Street.
Yeah.
It's
No,
different from
no,
that.
no,
It's
that's-
different from that.
Well, that's her memorandum of
That's her
February
memo,
1st.
but she sent that first, and then I did a more comprehensive list
Oh, okay.
of other uses.
Is that what you have?
Yeah, it's a chart that went out in the mail this afternoon.
It's in your package.
Guess what? I didn't read it. Can you reference that chart? Color is it?
It's a chart that looks like that, and it's
What's it look like, please?
entitled Zones, Land Use Permit
It's in this
Requirements.
package?
Yeah, the small package. The one at the top, right by your glass.
So is
By your
this,
cup.
is this what
There's
you're,
a package up by your cup.
yes, let's look at the end, go to the end. So is this what you're recommending, or is this just a general checklist?
This is a guide if you want to check off, if you want to make a list of permitted uses and in what location would they be permitted, because everything is identified in either by low density, medium, or high density permitting for different types of uses. So it's a list to check, put a notation on it, and
Okay.
to kind of
So
organize your
What
thoughts
do we
about.
do with this once we've completed this?
You can bring it back, you can scan it, you can send it
To who?
you can send it
This
to me.
thing.
I'll try to compile it.
Is it this list?
That's it. I'll
Okay.
give this to you if you want this. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
And then this will go to our next meeting to discuss?
Yeah, I think it would be good if we can kind of agree on a use list for each of the sections. I think that would be useful. So this would enable us each to go through the same list and tick off what we think would be a permitted use in a specific area, or not permitted, or approved by permit.
This is what John had really requested us to.
That's what he requested. So I'm just saying that would be useful for him.
So, and when do you want this by? Deadlines. What's a deadline?
Well, if this is helpful, I can frame the draft for the board's review, presuming that this matrix, which is very, very helpful, will be completed by the board.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it won't hold me up while
Okay.
the board is going through and kind of filling in the boxes, so to speak. That's a really, really valuable exercise. I can work at the same time the board members are doing that.
Okay, so,
So do you want to have
What's
it
to-
completed and us bring it to the next meeting?
or by Tuesday, maybe we ought to talk about the next meeting.
Yeah, maybe we need to talk about the next meeting, because our next meeting
This is-
is February 23rd. And that's, even giving our expanded calendar, if you will, we, I think everyone agrees, Pat's pushed this, you've said this, we shouldn't take the pressure off ourselves slack off. So at our next meeting on the 23rd, we will be going into executive session, so that may take some bit of time. I would expect that 45 minutes would probably be about right as a guesstimate, but I can't swear to that. But we would not have the entire meeting to devote to the seminary issues. So
That's what I thought you were getting at.
14th
I
or
got the
16th.
21st available.
No, that is the next meeting.
Oh,
No,
no,
the-
the 23rd,
no,
she
the
said.
23rd is the
23rd
next
is the next.
meeting.
It is the next meeting.
Well, the
I
4th,
said the 21st is what I got available.
Oh, I'm
Tuesday.
sorry, I didn't hear you.
14th is Valentine's Day, but then we could,
Don't you want to give us a Valentine?
So what you want us to do is to have this to you by when?
Well,
next meeting,
We haven't figured that
I
out
could do
yet.
the 13th, but I have a meeting at 8. So if we met earlier.
That's Monday.
Oh, yeah, we're not gonna have the thing by then, so
Not likely
that's not
to-
gonna work.
Easier for everybody to fill out.
Oh, I might be able to do the 20th.
well, Thursday's another option, the
The
18th.
16th,
16th, yeah.
The 16th, Thursday, the
I
16th?
have a commitment every Thursday, but, could we do the Monday, the 20th? Or is that?
That's
you
a
wanna do-
holiday. We can't
oh,
do a holiday.
That's a holiday week?
I could do next week,
guess.
the 15th, 16th, or 17th.
Yes.
Do
I
people,
could do the 17th.
that's a Friday.
I know,
So-
not ideal.
We could review at that time John's draft and the checklist of.
If we did the 17th?
That's Friday,
I know.
I know none of us want,
unless we're bringing cocktails.
you're in charge.
Actually, that's much easier than pizza, because you can put it in a Coke bottle.
Yeah, we can. Excuse me.
That would really be a disaster.
I'd rather be drinking martinis myself.
Yeah. So, is
I'd
the
rather not.
15th a day that's workable for everyone? Wednesday, the 15th?
Yeah. It's not the dormitory, so.
Wednesday, the 15th?
Works for me. Excuse me.
Not great for me, but that's okay.
This is a big job you took on, girlfriend.
I'm just, yeah. that's-
Just FYI, the Hamilton Historic District Commission has this room at that, from 6:30 on.
On which day, the
On the,
16th?
15th.
How about Thursday?
Let's see, the Environmental Impact Committee has it at 7 PM.
How about
16th.
Tuesday?
Well,
Could do it via Zoom.
we can
Oh.
do it,
Nah,
no.
I don't like Zoom meetings.
I don't.
So how
not
about the
for something-
17th? Or is that available, the room available?
It's
It
Friday,
is, but I'm not gonna be here for.
Okay.
Friday.
Okay.
Town hall closes at 12:30 on
Oh,
Fridays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do we go into the following week? Probably,
Well, we were already meeting the following week.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is it,
So we're kind of stuck.
The 13th is open here.
But
Yeah,
we
but
probably won't have
won't
something
have
to respond
John's.
to.
So,
Was there a problem with the 14th?
it's Valentine's Day.
I can't,
Just,
but
My wife
okay.
expects treatment. I'm fine with it.
Wait a minute, what about some of us expecting, never mind.
I'm okay with the 14th if you want to do that, but I'm just one
Is the
person.
room available on the 14th, Patrick?
It is.
It works for me.
I'm wondering, can we start earlier?
Sure.
Or do you want to just stick with 7?
I have a 6:30
Okay.
appointment that I can't
Right. All
change.
right,
But
Steve.
that's, I mean, it is what it is. Like, if I can't be here, I can catch up, or I can come late, possibly.
Whatever. I'm amenable.
Which day
So-
are you talking about?
So actually, it's,
Tuesday, the 14th.
we could do Tuesday, the 16th, it's not available, so we have to do the 14th.
Correct.
Does
That's it.
that work?
Yes.
And should we try for 6 o'clock? Everybody always forgets it's 6 o'clock, but, not everybody, but some.
Some individuals.
Some individuals, it's out of the ordinary, but,
Maybe pizza is in order at 6 o'clock.
yeah, on Valentine's Day. So should we do 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock?
Sounds good.
6 o'clock?
So
6
what
o'clock on the
What
14th.
about Bill? Can you make 6,
Can you
Bill?
make?
So we're gonna fill this out and,
Have it ready on the 14th, and we will also be able to review Jonathan Witten's overlay district draft.
so how are we gonna collate the information? I don't understand what's going on.
We can actually do it at the meeting,
You can
right?
bring it, and then we'll
Review it at the meeting.
review it at the meeting, go right through the list.
Okay,
Yeah.
As a clarification, the final column, the special district refers to the upper that we haven't discussed, that we don't have a plan for. It would be good if we,
so
we can make sure that what we put in each column is the same thing, or, I mean, that we're all thinking of the same column as referring to the same part of the site.
The special district,
SD is upper. Is there a column for lower you want us to use?
No, they were all folded into the L, M, and HDR.
So,
All the
no
dormitories.
OS, no SD?
Sorry?
No SD, no OS?
OS is open space, open space either for the special district, the top, or open space for the residential lower. That's the heritage landscape. So there's no dormitory component to this.
I don't get it. What are we gonna do with this?
Well, hold on.
Okay, okay.
So there's open space on the, okay, I get it, okay. So, I get it, okay. And what's SD?
Special district, that's the top of the hill. So that's-
Oh,
We
okay.
don't know what that's gonna be. And
Okay, so I gotta write that note.
the sheet that precedes that, it has all the definitions in it, the residential and special district zones. So that's where you find the zone descriptions,
Ah, okay,
so.
got it.
I have one other question for you, Marnie, on the minutes that we need to be moving along with for
What are
Robin.
we doing with
Yes.
this? I don't quite understand what's going on here.
Is there a way that the ones that have been
Bring it to the
done
next meeting.
by various people
And we're gonna fill it out
sent
at the
out so we
meeting?
could all
Yes.
review
Okay.
them
oh,
separately?
Pat, what, they go to
Bring the whole
Patrick.
thing.
Right,
Patrick
but
will
then-
transmit them
Understand
to
it.
all of us.
Okay, and then we
we're going
can-
to review them on the
Definitions
23rd.
are in the front.
Okay.
Right?
That's
Okay.
the other thing
Prepared to
about the
fill it out at the next meeting.
23rd. We
Okay,
go into
I
executive
understand what
session
we're- So
and
we're
we
gonna
have
have a
minutes.
discussion about each
Right,
one
I
of these
just want to make
things.
sure we're moving that along.
So we're gonna go with it.
Yeah.
Okay, fine, got it. So we don't need to send anything into anything, we're just gonna have a meeting on the
14th.
On the 14th,
14th,
yes,
6 PM meeting?
yes,
Okay,
Here.
so that's basically 1 week.
right,
Okay.
Bring your Valentine.
right.
Wait a minute, what if it's a two-legged Valentine?
Huh?
Never mind.
Okay, I think we're getting silly. It's,
Not me.
We haven't gotten silly yet.
so it's almost 10 o'clock. So do we have anything more to discuss at the moment?
Storm management.
Well, no, let's, Mr. Whitten is still with us. Did you have any more questions for the board?
No, I don't, Madam Chair and members of the board, thank you. No, I'm good, and I'm going to do my best to have a draft for you by the weekend. I'll send it to Patrick, unless the board would like me to send it to the full board members, however you'd like me to proceed. And then I'll see you next Tuesday.
Right, well, thank you. And in the meantime, if you had any questions for me, I believe you have my contact information, and I'd be happy to assist you in any way that I can.
Great, thank you. Thank you, members of the board. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is stormwater management, and this should not delay us too much, but Patrick Amel and I had a Zoom meeting with Alex Weshett from KP Law, and he provided us with a draft of a proposed amendment to Section 4 of the Stormwater Management Bylaw. If you recall, that's the applicability section. And he, in that section, he provided for a land disturbance review and, excuse me, and also an expanded applicability tied to lot size and slope. Excuse me. And he also provided us with 3 alternative definitions of a common plan of development or sale. And he indicated that that he really couldn't go forward until the board evaluated some of the material he provided. But he didn't go into any significant depth. He didn't look at the enforcement provisions, and he didn't look at the stormwater management rules and regulations. So, long story short, I think on February 23rd, we should schedule a meeting to consider Alex's questions to the board, and I can send around a memo with his suggestions, and we can go from there. So it was kind of a circumscribed presentation that he provided us with, and
Please send it to us as soon as you get it.
yeah, and then we can kind of squeeze in storm management. We also asked him to back out from fall town meeting what we would have to do to get something on the warrant for the fall town meeting. So maybe we'll have that by the 23rd, so we can talk about it then. And does anybody else have any board business? Patrick, do you have anything?
No, since we've gotten the meetings squared away, at least schedule-wise, I think that's fine. I did want to make mention, as Beth had a while ago, you've been working on meeting minutes, so I'm going to make sure, and whatever's been sent to me, I'll get it out to you folks. If you haven't completed the individual meeting minutes that you've been working on, please try to do so. Get those to me and I can get those sent out.
Is there any update on having someone hired to do the minutes?
You have a person now hired.
Okay, so we know which minutes we still need?
We know which meeting minutes that we need.
Excellent.
I think I did prepare like a little chart. Did you send that out, Patrick?
Yes.
I think you did, yeah. So, yes, we're way behind. It's hard to, we can't catch up, it seems, but we're making some progress. So on the 23rd, I'd like to get approval of the minutes on the agenda so that they can get on the planning board's website. And also, we'll have minutes for the benefit of town council in the litigation that we're involved with, so.
So the expectation is that we would have read the minutes before we come?
Yes, so we can
So we don't
hopefully
have to spend as
approve-
much time, we can write up.
Right, well, I'm hoping that because I had volunteers redo the minutes.
Yep.
And if you redid those minutes with reference to the YouTube videos, the minutes that you all produce should be absolute models of clarity, and we will just say these are fabulous, and we'll move to approve them. That's my hope.
6 pages.
Oh, I always can beat that, yeah. No, they're long, and they're long because those meetings were long.
I know.
So it's sometimes hard to make them short. especially in those circumstances, because they could be used to really refresh our recollection since we were presented with so much information. And say, for example, the minutes that would be prepared for tonight, it would be helpful if they were complete, because we got a lot of really good information from John Whitten, and it's, it would be
Right.
nice to, you know, have that to hand when we are actually evaluating his overlay district, just to remember what he said and what was important. So if there's nothing else, anything else?
Just a thank you to Emil and Jonathan for all their hard work.
Absolutely. I
Agreed.
mean,
It was phenomenal.
really.
I was thinking about that while you guys were doing some stuff, and I go, oh my God, I remember blah, blah, blah.
But I mean, I do think it's so important for the public, because I think
Yeah.
They can
it starts
visualize
to
it.
give them a sense of what we're after. And if we encourage people to watch, especially tonight's session, it'll give them a vision on that. So I think that's
Yeah.
really helpful.
No, really good job. So, would anyone like to
Motion.
adjourn?
No,
No, we're gonna
I
stay all
wanna
night.
stay.
I
Can't we
make
do
a motion that
more?
we adjourn.
Second,
When I call your name, roll call vote. Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Weeden, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Beth or I?
Rick Mitchell,
Aye.
and Marnie Crouch.
well, you forgot me.
Richard Boroff
Aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. I apologize.
No big deal. See, I'd still be sitting here till